Chapter 1798. Mother, do you like me like this? I won't be a celestial sword. I won't be proud of being a transmigrator. I'm a lowly native. So what if I'm a native? I can still pierce through the sky. I have the same ambition. I'm me. I'm the same fireworks. Must it be a big cigar? Can it be a red double happiness? It was also at this moment that the mysterious aura from the Yongding in the Sparrow Palace moved slightly. Lu Xiaoyi immediately understood how dangerous his choice was. That was a mysterious aura from Tai. It couldn't be said to be the only one in the universe, but its function was to evolve the foundation of the universe. It would be of great use to him when he grasped all 36 Khanate Daos and the era changed. It was a good thing, but there was a prerequisite. The person who activated it had to have a pure spirit and be the same in the past, present, and future. The scope of being the same was very broad. If he set his past in his previous life, or that celestial sword, it would no longer be the same, because he had the experience of being a celestial or having a celestial weapon. He would no longer have the qualifications to enjoy the ancient gifts of the universe. The heavens only gave once, and it would never be repeated. If he set his past in his previous life, or that celestial sword, his future could only stop abruptly before he became a celestial. Would anyone reject such a past? No one would reject it. Therefore, this great gift was a huge poison, but the heavens left a way out for people. If you rejected such a great benefit from the past, the heavens would give you a better future. Lu Xiaoyi laughed foolishly, and tears flowed down uncontrollably. Mother, you've saved your son again. Even if you were suspicious of me, you never gave up on me. He was very sure that he had been schemed against by others during the trip to the Yongding. Being surrounded and killed was just a pretense. Later on, the actions of the bamboo hat in the anchor chain of the three realms made people think that everything was over. However, the real killer was here. It wasn't to kill, but to cut off your path. As long as you think like a normal cultivator, you are destined to not be able to avoid this disaster. You've unknowingly cut off your future. You don't even know where you've gone wrong. Even a cautious half-immortal like him had fallen into such a trap without knowing it. If he hadn't revealed his true intentions in front of his mother, this wasn't something that the bamboo hat man could have done alone. At best, he was just an executor. Perhaps he was the kind who didn't know the inside story. This was because the calculation of 3 lives had already exceeded the scope of knowledge of a half-immortal. It should belong to the scope of an immortal. Has the mastermind behind the sword vein finally made a move? It was still very covert, but as time passed, this kind of targeting would become more and more obvious until they finally met shirtless. Originally, he had wanted to take advantage of this battle of Hung River to get rid of this bamboo hat, but now it seemed that he could wait. Let's see if we can find out where the mastermind is from through him. The higher one went, the more complicated the pyramid of cultivation became. Given the character of the ancestors in his sword vein, there were probably many who disliked him, but he couldn't figure it out. There was still time. Lu Xiaoyi settled down by his mother's side. Only here did he feel completely relaxed and calm. It was the perfect time to think about those illusory and strange things. For example, his past and present were like ordinary people. There were countless segments, and he had to choose one segment as a reference point. Even if his philosophy was the same as the 3 Qins, and he would never use it to be reborn, as a part of cultivation, the past, present, future, self, and transcendence all had to have a conclusion. It was not something that could be casually brushed aside. He treated his past life as a long drama, playing it for himself and for his mother to watch. There were many strange pasts, but they only made her laugh. Until a typical scene appeared. It was an ordinary life. The master was talented, but was willing to live in seclusion. He didn't become an official or teach for his whole life. His family was well off, and he was kind and charitable. He had a wife and 4 concubines and many children. He died of old age in bed and died at 100 years old. This is the one you like, right? Lu Xiaoyi murmured. Then it's him. An ordinary life also has its ordinary pleasures. With this, he established the point of his past rebirth. He didn't care if he was easily killed. To him, he just wanted to stay in the present world. He didn't care who the enemy was. The three Qins were right. If a swordsman was killed in the present world, what right did he have to stand between heaven and earth? During the establishment of the past, he didn't forget to nag at his mother. Good fellow, 9 children, dozens of grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. Mother, if this is really the case, will you be able to handle it? With all the people and horses in the world, even Lu province might not be able to feed so many mouths. Lu Xiaoyi's establishment of his 3 lives was almost like a child's play, but he knew that it wasn't a child's play. This choice was the most in line with his intentions. The path of cultivation was long, and everyone had their own pursuits. For the great Tao, for battle, for the sect. But he understood that if he wasn't himself, then all of this would be meaningless. There was one advantage to walking the most ordinary path, and that was that all kinds of tricks from the mysterious realm were useless against him. Now, he no longer needed to overtake cars on bends. If there were too many cars, he might really bend. The establishment of his true self also needed time to polish. In any case, he had nothing to do, so he built a hut and lived here. His state of mind was even more relaxed because he always felt that his mother was by his side, making him feel full of security, even if one was a half-immortal and the other was just an ordinary human old lady. In essence, this was the relationship between a son and a mother. More than 10 years had passed. These were the happiest, most relaxed, and most unrestrained days of his 2,000 years of cultivation. He and his mother talked about everything. His troubles, his dreams, and his ambitions. His mother had also answered him. Through the wind that blew, the grass that covered the mountains, and the silence of the night, he could understand her, because his heart was clean. To what extent did a cultivator have to cultivate to be able to truly understand himself? It was very simple, but also very difficult. Lu Xiaoyi's past determined that his past was an incomparably complicated process. In the long run, loopholes would be exposed in front of others. In addition to obtaining a powerful past, there would be too many opportunities left. His method of dealing with it was simple and straightforward, once and for all. The only thing that made him a little curious was, what kind of amazing story was this part of the immortal sword's past? Was it related to the crow ancestor? If those people who treated him differently because of this relationship saw him again, would it be different? Would Jiuyi scold him for forgetting his ancestors? Would Phoenix take back Big Bird Palace? Would Ba Jia still call him senior brother? Would Uncle Zhai still obey his orders? Would Black Dragon still listen to his orders? Would the Dome Swordsman group still listen to his words? He didn't know, but even if there were so many disadvantages, he still chose to be himself. From now on, these 2 strange parts of his past would be hidden among countless other parts of his past. As he became stronger, they would become fainter and fainter until they could no longer be found, because these 2 parts of his past might not be his real past. Chapter 1799. Lu Xiaoyi did not attract anyone's attention in Pu City. For in essence, soul half-immortal. If he did not want to, the few Yuanying patriarchs in the lower 3 stars would never be able to detect his existence. Not to mention those Jin, Dan, and Foundation establishment cultivators. With just a few tricks, this place would become a forbidden zone. He originally thought that he could accompany his mother like this for a few decades until the collapse of the 13th Great Tao Fragment. But there were always troubles that came knocking on his door. They did not come from the mortal world, but from beyond the heavens. Several large floating rafts descended from the sky and stopped outside the atmosphere. A perfected Lord's divine intent instantly spread throughout the lower 3 stars. Haozhou Kanan's people are saved regardless of their realm or age. We cultivators will open the door to convenience. Lu Xiaoyi roughly understood what he meant when he heard this. The collapse of the heavenly Tao and the chaos of the universe were not limited to just one place. Only large worlds like the 5th Ring Heaven's Choice, Zhou Xian, and Heng He were in chaos. This was a war that could affect the overall situation of the universe's cultivation world. However, other than such a war, there were actually many small conflicts. Taking advantage of the chaos, the reasons were complicated. It could be said that they wanted to gain benefits from the chaos. It could also be that they were cooperating with a large world's surrounding operations. This was not absolute. Because everyone was living in a chaotic era, the large worlds were busy with their own affairs and had weakened their control over their surroundings. This was the best time to take advantage of the chaos. If there was a grudge, to take revenge. If there was a grievance, to be redressed. If there was a benefit to be taken advantage of. Those who had the slightest bit of foresight would do what they could to the best of their ability. Such small conflicts happened every day. Because it did not affect the overall situation, the large worlds did not care about it and were too lazy to care. This caused the cruel wars between the small cultivation worlds to become more and more intense. The battles between the large worlds still followed the rules. However, the battles between the small worlds did not care so much. Their attitude towards the low-level cultivators was very cruel. Everyone knew this, but there was no way to restrict them. This was the characteristic of this era. If there were losses, they would need to be replenished. It was difficult to replenish the large cultivators, but it was relatively easier for the mid-level and low-level cultivators. This was because there were a large number of mid-level and low-level cultivation planets in the universe. There were no large cultivators, but there were countless small cultivators who could be used as cannon fodder. This kind of chaos had been going on for thousands of years. It was becoming more and more frequent, and it was gradually spreading. Even the poor spirit sky region was affected. Under the great chaos, there was no place that was safe. Due to the extreme scarcity of great cultivators, celestial bodies like Lower 3 would not be involved in the cultivation war in this airspace. This was because they could not leave at all, and no one would be willing to attack such a remote place. However, the cultivators here were still meaningful to some in the upper realm who thirsted for strength. In the past, there had been mid-level cultivation planets like Chawang who would regularly ferry people over. They were also willing to take the bait. There were also many restrictions. The purpose of ferrying people was to develop and strengthen one's own star field, so everyone could accept it and enthusiastically participate. However, in the past 1,000 years, there had been more and more realms coming to ferry people away, and the frequency had also increased. This was not the rhythm of dragging people away to live a good life, but to join the war. No one was willing to be recruited wave after wave, like chives being cut. Back then, Chawang's actions were able to reach a balance between the two sides, but now, the cutting was too deep and too frequent. It had greatly affected the inheritance of the cultivation world in these small realms. Therefore, it had become a nightmare. No matter how tempting the Haozhou upper realm cultivators were in the sky, no one responded. Instead, in the native sects, everyone hid their disciples deeply. This situation had been going on for thousands of years. Even a fool would know what ferrying people was all about. The Haozhou perfected lord was very impatient. A small, broken, low-level planet with few Yuaning dared to be so disrespectful to the emissaries from the upper realm. You people from the lower realm are stubborn. You look down on the upper realm cultivators and resist the heavenly axiom. Are you trying to force me to use tricks to force you out by hiding like a turtle? If that's really the case, you'll lose your dignity. Don't blame me for being rude first. A few lower 3 Yuaning trembled in fear and had no choice but to stand up. At their level, they were like the heavens in their own land. However, under the pressure of a large external force, they were nothing. This kind of elder ancestor was extremely sullen. An old nascent soul helplessly explained, "Upper realm cultivator, please calm down. It's not that we're neglecting the emissaries, but the star domain is barren of spiritual vigor. There are limited cultivators, and we can't afford to recruit them. In just a short 100 years, 3 emissaries, including the noble emissaries, have come and taken away a group at a time. How can there be anyone left? Even if you're cutting chives, you should at least give them a chance to grow again, right? It's not that we don't want to listen, but we can't. Upper realm cultivator is wise. Please give us some time to recuperate. When you summon us again, will definitely respond. The Haozhou perfected lord was clear in his heart. How could he not understand the difficulties of the lower realm? However, he did not want to wait this time. Recuperate? If he really did recuperate, he was afraid that the epic would be over. What was the point then? Along the way, this kind of situation could be found everywhere. These small realms were all making excuses, and not a single one of them was willing to do so. If you're really soft-hearted and don't use any tricks, then don't even think about sending a single person away. He had gained very little from this trip. If he went back like this, he would not be able to report back. Therefore, he had long given up on negotiating. The best way to deal with these ignorant cultivators from the lower realm was to leave them with no other choice. In the beginning, they were polite and courteous, but along the way, their attitudes became worse and worse. There was no other way. If they did not do this, they would not be able to recruit any talents. The lower three realms was one of the last few lower realm star domains in this space. They had already thought about it. In order to complete their mission, they might as well capture all the lower three realms in one fell swoop. It was better than leaving a bad name in the entire star domain. They could no longer come here. A few of their crops had already been harvested. They could not even be considered chicken ribs. Those above the foundation establishment stage and below the yuanying stage, including you so-called ancestors, get on the raft. I'll wait for 45 minutes. If you don't come by then and I take action, it won't look good for everyone. Were they going to eat all the lower three realms dry? For a lower realm, if all the cultivators above the foundation establishment stage were taken away, it was equivalent to cutting off the limited inheritance of this planet. The remaining Qi refinement stage cultivators could only rely on themselves in the future. Spiritual opportunity was already very limited. Without a guide, one could imagine how difficult it would be to reach the upper realm. There was another point. If this planet lost the effective restraint of cultivators, those Qi refinement stage cultivators would not care about the taboo rules of the cultivation world like mortals. They would definitely do whatever they wanted. If a war broke out between several countries, who knew how many people would die? Pure cultivation planets would not have large-scale war tragedies. Pure mortal countries also had their own set of methods to govern the world. What they were most afraid of was a world dominated by Qi refinement stage cultivators. It was the most unscrupulous and uncontrollable. All the weaknesses of human nature would be exposed until a new balance was found in the cruelty. Chapter 1800. The Yuanying felt desolate. This was truly a case of sitting at home. Yet trouble came from the sky. A small realm like theirs could not escape the waves of the universe's chaos. Even if they did not have the intention to fight for anything, they could not avoid certain things. Being forced to this point, there was no way out. It was not something that could be resolved just by begging for mercy. The upper realm cut off the inheritance of our orthodoxy for their own sake. This is against the rules of the cultivation world. If this gets out, I'm afraid it'll be detrimental to your realm. Although we're 3 stars lower, we still have people who have achieved the Tao. If we become estranged because of this, everyone will lose face. How about this? You and I each take a step back. Based on the total number of cultivators in the star domain, 30% of your realm will be transferred. This is our greatest sincerity. Although our realms are not high enough, we still have the courage to fight to the death. Haozhou's perfected monarch was shocked. Just this sentence alone was enough to show fear. How dare they threaten the upper realm? Someone who has achieved the Tao? You're not messing around in Chaoguang, right? Chaoguang can't even protect itself and obediently boarded my Haozhou's floating raft. What qualifications do you have to meet the upper realm's conditions? Rules? The universe is chaotic, and the rules have yet to be set. Right now, Haozhou is the rule here. The perfected monarch waved his hand, and a few large floating rafts floated down from the atmosphere. A few perfected monarchs stood side by side with him. Another dozen Yuanying stood on the clouds. This was a blatant show of force. In the end, he still wanted to get rid of them without shedding a drop of blood. There are 17 Yuaniing perfected monarchs here. I'll give you a chance. Don't you have someone who has achieved the Tao? Pick anyone here and attack with all your might. As long as you can make him take half a step back, my Haozhou's raft team will leave immediately. We won't make things difficult for you." Before he finished speaking, the space paused, and an inexplicable light appeared. Following that, celestial phenomenon appeared. The leader of the perfected monarchs spoke a lot of nonsense, but he did not expect this to be the result. That ray of light did not dissipate. Instead, it hovered in midair, swallowing the sword chi. The remaining 16 perfected cultivators and nascent soul stage cultivators all felt that the tip of the sword was pointing at them. None of them dared to move. A voice said lightly, "Haozhou? Where is that? I've never heard of it." Even the strongest in a region dared to come out and bully the weak while the world was in chaos. Wasn't this letting themselves loose? Which sect master realm are you waiting for? Tell me about it. The 16 Haozhou Grand Cultivators felt apprehensive. It wasn't that they were willing to admit defeat, but they still hadn't discovered who the owner of this flying sword was. Where is it? It didn't reveal any aura at all. It was as if the flying sword was a flying sword that could think on its own. Even the sound came from this flying sword. Apart from the nascent soul cultivators, the leaders of the group were all perfected soul cultivators, led by the one who was killed. Since they had reached a certain cultivation level, their foresight was naturally not too bad. Just from a momentum of the flying sword, they knew that it was at least the work of an immortal soul cultivator. As for whether it was from within the realm or outside of the void, they were not too sure. The difference in strength was huge, but fortunately, it seemed that they could still hold their own in terms of numbers. In the cultivation world, face was the most important thing. This person was so fierce and overbearing. How could they admit defeat just like that? Even if he really had such intentions, he would have to puff himself up at his own cost in front of so many people. Therefore, no one answered. They used silence to resist this person's pressure. The flying sword slowly turned and aimed at another perfected soul cultivator. Not going to speak? That perfected cultivator was nervous. In a situation where he couldn't figure out the other party's background, no one was willing to go against an upper realm expert. However, since things had reached this point, there was no room for retreat. He still didn't say a word. However, he secretly circulated his magic power, and the treasured rings around his body were activated. At this moment, his defense was already at its peak. It wasn't just him. The other perfected cultivators beside him were also helping him with his defense. In an instant, light and shadow intertwined, as if his entire person was merged into countless thick shields. With the combined strength of these people, there was probably nothing in this world that could pierce through. If this person made any other movements, his hiding place would definitely be exposed. At that time, whether they fought or retreated, there would still be someone to talk to. The flying sword slowly moved. All the Haozhou cultivators stared at it nervously. They were very clear that if this flying sword attacked someone else, the person receiving the sword would definitely die. However, they were also clear that the punishment for an upper realm cultivator like this would definitely not be directed to the east and hit the west. The flying sword accelerated. The magic power of all the cultivators surged out. There were even some impatient Yuaniing who directly attacked the flying sword. However, the Tao realm of the battle space suddenly changed. It was as if all the spells lost the support of the Tao realm and became simple and ordinary spells. However, that flying sword pierced through them. In a battle between perfected cultivators, without the support of the Tao realm, it was a one-sided battle. The second Tao dispelling heavenly phenomenon appeared, causing all the Haozhou cultivators to feel as if they had fallen into an ice cave. This time, that mysterious cultivator didn't waste any words. Instead, he turned the tip of his sword towards the third perfected cultivator. His intention was clear as day. They couldn't run. It wasn't just a matter of face. Everyone felt as if their bodies had been planted with a sword parasite. This was the language between cultivators. There was no need for words. Running away meant death. Even if there were 15 of them left, they had no confidence in escaping the pursuit of this terrifying swordsman. The evolution of the Tao realm just now had clearly shown them what it meant to be one-sided. The third Soul perfected cultivator could no longer resist the mountain-like pressure. Most importantly, there was no point in struggling in front of such a cold-blooded upper realm cultivator. He didn't care about their lives at all. What did it mean if all 17 of them died here? It was worthless. Haozhou's Sect Master Realm is Yangding Upper Realm. That voice was still indifferent. Do two things. Send the cultivators you plundered on the rafts back to where you plundered them. After you're done, return to Haozhou and ask your domain manager to look for Yangding Yangkongzi. Explain the reason and admit your guilt. If you can't do it, or if you have other intentions in the future, I don't mind making a trip to Haozhou to help you remember today's lesson. The sword light flashed and disappeared without a trace. It was as if it had never appeared. The 15 Haozhou cultivators had just enjoyed the glory of the upper realm, but in the blink of an eye, they were pressed to the ground and lost their will. There was no need to think. They had bumped into bad luck. It was possible that there was a cultivator from this realm who had made a name for himself in the outside world. It was also possible that a cultivator happened to pass by and stop by. However, this possibility wasn't high. Who was Kong Yangzi? He was the dominant figure behind their backs. To them, he was an existence that they couldn't look up to. Yet, this swordsman had mentioned him so casually. Regardless of whether it was true or not, they had really kicked an iron plate this time. They didn't even know who the other party was. They didn't dare to ask. The rule of the cultivation realm was that if you didn't ask, everyone would stop. However, if you had to ask clearly, it meant that there was no end to it. Then, what would be waiting for them in the future? They didn't dare to think about it. Chapter 1801. An old Yuanian cultivator went from trembling with fear to trembling. They didn't notice that a big worm had appeared in the inner realm. This was too rude. Are you Fairy Dye's friend? Thank you for your help. We greet you. They knew their limits. They knew that great cultivators like them didn't like to be disturbed, so they didn't mention anything about meeting them. If they were willing, they would naturally invite them. If they weren't willing, they would at least avoid the awkwardness. They asked this because they had met a perfected monarch swordsman from the lower 3 planets. He was also a sword fairy. Therefore, they naturally thought that he was Fairy Dye's friend. After all, a sword vein was relatively rare in the universe. Unfortunately, there was no reply. It was obvious that this swordsman was too lazy to meet people. He wasn't strong enough and didn't have any local specialties. It was normal for him not to meet him. The lower 3 planets had little spiritual vigor. In the eyes of great figures, they didn't have any practical value. Fortunately, the lower 3 planets had produced a great figure who was still very nostalgic. He just didn't know which realm he had joined. For cultivators like them who didn't leave their homes, they were blind as soon as they left the atmosphere. They really didn't understand the situation in the universe. The most taboo thing for cultivators was to bite off more than one could chew. Based on your strength and position, you had to consider things. You could either join the great tide of the universe or live your own life. You could live for 1,000 years, teach some proud disciples, and enjoy the respect of a realm. They were afraid that they would remember things that didn't belong to them. The lower 3 planets' cultivators knew what level they were at, so Lu Xiaoyi naturally didn't feel anything for them. What should they say? It was all nonsense. If they were really ambitious, they should walk out of this realm, even if it was a dead end. This was their choice, so he shouldn't interfere. His attitude towards his home planet was the same as Yin Dai's. It was fine as long as it was safe and sound. He would continue to stay by his mother's side and lay a good foundation for his upper realm in the past, present, and future so that he could deal with any changes in his realm in the future. Strange changes gradually occurred around Pu City. Driven by the power of cultivation, the current dynasty began to govern the Gobi Desert. It was not hard to think of ways to control sand, plant trees, and irrigate canals. What was difficult was whether one had a compassionate heart in their thoughts and consciousness. As the landlords of the lower 3 stars, the Yuanying cultivators, who were extremely familiar with this region, were not completely clueless. From various clues, they were able to deduce that the great cultivator's general hiding place was around Pooh City. Now that they had a rough location, of course they wouldn't search every inch of it. That would be too stupid. Hence, the management of the surrounding environment of Pooh City came about. They were all smart people. They understood that the higher one's cultivation level was, the more sensitive one would be to the environment. It was just that they were a little too eager for quick success. However, this was a kind gesture, so he couldn't say anything. Here, if the higher-ups wanted to push for something, they would definitely succeed. If the officials didn't work hard, they would replace them. If the dynasty didn't work hard, they would replace it. It was simple and crude. Being in a situation like this, you can't avoid some flattery, especially when it comes to these old foxes. After the confirmation of the 3 lives, his cultivation level began to increase rapidly. His foundation was set, and the framework gradually stabilized. It was much easier to fill in his flesh and blood. When his own 3 lives system was complete, it was correspondingly easier for him to see the 3 lives of others clearly. At this point, he finally reached the level of the seniors on the Sword Dao tablet in terms of breaking the 3 lives. If there was a chance, he would compete with them. He was confident that he could defeat Hu Xiudao and Wu Shixing, but he wasn't sure about the 3 Qin Chonglu. As for the Crow ancestor, maybe on this day, when the first ray of sunlight shone into the transparent shed, he realized that it was time to leave. With the perception of a half-immortal and the 12 innate great Daos in his hands, his solid foundation gave him a unique understanding of the changes in the heavenly way. Within 10 years, there would definitely be a great Dao that would collapse. Today, it had been 110 years since he came from the interior world. Mother, Aunt Kai, I'm leaving. I'll come back to see you often in the future. He kowtowed heavily in front of the grave a few times. He didn't pay much attention to such mortal rituals before, but only when he came here did he realize that these most mundane rituals were often the simplest and most sincere. He leaped into the air and shook his divine sense. The entire world was under his divine control, especially the few Yuanying, who were immediately awakened. He had nothing to say. When faced with a group of people from his hometown who didn't have any aspirations, it was tiring to say anything. The most practical thing was to keep some local specialties. He only sighed and shook his hand. Dozens of precious Taoist instruments floated in the air from his storage ring. In fact, he didn't even count them carefully. There was no need to. Time, energy, word count. Sensing the mixed aura in the sky, several Yuanying realm cultivators of the lower 3 stars hesitated for a long while before they gathered together. There was no trace of anyone, only a ball of treasure light and purple gas. They had no other choice. It was useless to leave the sword aura talisman behind. Instead, it might bring a fatal disaster to these people. Only these messy Taoist treasures were the most suitable. The few Yuanying were moved. They had been alone in this world for a long time and had never seen the magical effects of the treasures in the outside world. They only felt that each and every one of these treasures could be passed down as a sect's most precious treasure. However, there were dozens of them here. It would be a lie to say that they weren't moved. However, they knew that now was not the time to fight for the treasures. If they didn't do it well, they might lose their lives. The cold-blooded and heartless swordsmen not only extinguished their impulses, but also their subconscious desire to go out and see the world. Finally, the oldest Yuanying opened his mouth and said, "Everyone, I see that the origins of these treasures are different. Techniques, realms of Tao, materials, etc. They must have come from different realms. I'll be honest, I'm afraid that they won't be easy to obtain. Of course, it doesn't matter if these treasures are on Shangxiu. However, it might not be the case if they're on us." Everyone nodded. The situation was obvious. If they used these treasures to fight with others, if they were found out that they came from a familiar place, there would be no reason for them to bear the consequences. The old Yuanying said, "How about this? Shangshou must have left these treasures here for us. This is without a doubt. However, we can't be greedy. This is our attitude. Will Shangshou come back? When will Fairy Dai come back to visit? If we're greedy, I'm afraid it won't end well for us. Everyone was worried. After all, they were all Yuanian cultivators. They had a basic mentality. If that's the case, we'll each take one as our sex heirloom. As for the rest, I see that Shangshou came from the south of Pu City. He didn't hide it, which means that he's hinting something to us. When we find the land, we'll buy it and build a shrine for Shangshou's family and elders. We don't need to be grand. We just need to ensure that the whole area is quiet and safe. There's nothing wrong with planting more trees and flowers. Then, we'll enshrine these treasures and send someone to look after them. Every time a Yuanian cultivator in the lower 3 stars advances, they can come here and take one. If we do it well and selflessly, we'll have a future and endless legacy. These were truly the words of an old man. They were indeed flattering the old man. With this combination, when Shangshou came back, there would only be benefits. There would be no complaints. This was the way to last. Chapter 1802. Lu Xiaoyi leapt up and ran through the beast territory. There were still 10 years left, so he needed to find a large group. He had friends here, Hong Yin and Peacock, but he didn't know where the young gods from the various large domains were hiding. Cultivators had a lot of autonomy. He could only roughly designate a space, but he couldn't specify the exact location. There were too many impermanents in the void of the universe, so cultivators had to make their own decisions. You couldn't treat these old monsters that were thousands of years old as your own army of sword soldiers. There were many things that he didn't need to remind. He was sure that as long as he found one young god group, he would find everything. Even if so many young god from large domains came here, it wouldn't be easy to find them, especially when these old guys were deliberately covering their tracks. But he didn't need to find them himself. It was fine as long as he found Hong Yin and Peacock. Sister Kong Shi, I'm here again. I haven't seen you for many years. I really miss you. Kong Shi bowed respectfully, but she was speechless. You're so senior. Is it appropriate to call me sister? She couldn't take it seriously, so she could only laugh it off. Lord Lu's visit brings light to my Peacock race's humble dwelling. You're here for that matter, right? This old uncle or some other messy relatives was really very difficult to deal with. They were born to be a troublemaker. They had only tormented Hengi domain for a few hundred years, and now they were gathering people to destroy the domain. Of course, she didn't reject it. The beast territory and Hengi domain didn't get along well. Of course, she was willing to get involved. It would be best if Hengi domain was consigned to eternal damnation. Otherwise, with such a strange and powerful orthodoxy beside her, it was actually very uncomfortable. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Yes, a friend invited me. Actually, I didn't want to come. Fighting is bad. I hate war the most. Where are these fellows? They're hiding very well. I didn't see any clues along the way. Kong, she curled her lips. This kind of person, he was pretending to be innocent of the things he did. However, what she couldn't understand was how Lu Jun had managed to gather so many Origin Worlds domains. Almost all the famous ones were here. Just from this point, she had to admit that he had deep connections in the Origin World. The fifth ring and Zhou Xian's natural selection are in the inverse space. The anchor chain and the float were on the other side of the Hung River, and Hong Yin was in charge of communication. Luo Sutian and Guangming were in Chaos Weave. Yangding hasn't arrived yet. Lu Xiaoyi asked, where are the ancient beasts? Kong, she smiled. They are in the beast territory. I will bring Lu Jun to meet them. Under Kong Shi's lead, Lu Xiaoyi saw the group of immemorial beasts beside the peacock's encampment. The Kuan Peng didn't come, and Xiang Lu didn't seem to be here either. The one in charge here was the Black Dragon head, He Buhui. When they were alone, the Black Dragon leader looked at him. You seem different from before. I don't know if I'm right or not. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Brother Black Dragon, you're right. I have excluded those external things that may affect my cultivation from the 3 lives. Therefore, I may still be the original me, but I may also not be the me in your impression. In that case, will Brother Black Dragon still help me? The Black Dragon leader was surprised. Although they spoke as if they were guessing riddles, they knew each other's meaning very well. After looking at him for a while, the Black Dragon looked up and laughed. I'm not as good as you, because I wanted to get rid of that guy's influence my whole life, but I couldn't. You could obviously get the benefits of being in a favorable position, but you threw that guy aside. Well done. Well done. If you were just a shadow, we would just be doing our old friendship. But if you threw that guy aside, we could be friends. At least we have something in common, and that is that we hate that guy everywhere. Really hate him? Not necessarily, but they did have something in common, and that was their extreme ego. They would never become someone else's shadow, even if that person was their benefactor, master, elder, guide, or someone they would rather die to protect. But this didn't mean that they were willing to become his shadow. This was the last pride of his soul. Actually, thinking about it carefully, if that guy was in their position, he would probably have thrown this kind of restraint to the side, right? This was that guy's true core philosophy. Without freedom, without ego, without self-respect, he would rather die. So, Lu Xiaoyi, throwing away that part of the past, was actually learning this essence. The Black Dragon leader sighed because of this point. At this moment, Lu Xiaoyi could be considered to have truly gained the Black Dragon leader's true respect, and not treated him as someone's substitute. The main point is the eternal river. This is the source of the eternal river realm's strength. Your mission is to enter the eternal river and destroy their power absorption. But I'll be honest, to do this is not easy. The Black Dragon leader was very clear-headed. I know. Actually, there are many difficulties. How to break through the heaven and earth great membrane. How to clear the eternal river's inevitable restrictions. This is the specialty of our dragon race. You don't have to worry. Our dragon race can live until now and still prosper. It's not because of luck. Do you not fought side by side with that guy many times? What are his fighting characteristics? Can you imagine? Lu Xiaoyi thought for a while. Wise and powerful, cleansing the demons. The Black Dragon leader spat. Fart. If he can sneak attack, he'll never face it head-on. Sprinkling lime, laxatives, stun people, there's no despicable method that he doesn't use. Those who fought with that guy, half of them were not killed by flying swords, but died of depression. Old Black. I've followed him for thousands of years. The only gain is that I've become less like a dragon. So, mind your own matters. Why should do Old Black? I'll think of a way. This kind of Black Dragon, instead, made Lu Xiaoyi feel very assured. The two of them had a secret conversation. When Lu Xiaoyi left, She looked at him with a complicated expression. Lord Lu, do you take my peacock race as friends? Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. Of course. Otherwise, I wouldn't have let them gather at the beast territory. Big sister Kong, why do you say that? She stared at him, as if wanting to see through what this smiling face was made of. Why was he clearly a human, but he never spoke human language? The ancient beast came to my beast territory with a majestic aura, but this is just for others to see. To my peacock race, there's still many things that cannot be hidden from us. I only have one question. Where's the main force of the ancient beasts? If you don't want to answer, I won't blame you. After all is fair in war, but I don't want to be kept in the dark. This will decide the deployment of my peacock race, including the great geese and the beast territory strength. If you need our strength, we have the right to know. Chapter 1803. Lu Xiaoyi smiled apologetically. Big sister, I didn't tell you because the composition of your demon territory is too complicated. But in the end, some things can't be hidden. If you want to know now, you have to keep your mouth shut, including Hong Yin and those big mouths. Shi still looked at him quietly. In the demon territory, the peacock race was famous for their silence. It was the same in the entire universe's cultivation world. This personality came from their inherited bloodline, the phoenix. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Of course he believed in these beautiful creatures. After all, they were his family. We didn't say because we weren't sure. The orthodoxy of Hung River is very special. It's very difficult to mix sand into it. So we don't know anything about Hung River's response. In war, it's a big taboo to know oneself, but not the enemy. Kongshi was puzzled. What do you mean by we? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. I'm talking about the 5 rings. I'm a friend of the 3 pure ones. He's slacking off up there while I'm running around down there. That son of a bitch. The peacock race has always been neighbors with the people of Hung River. Then in Big Sister Kong's opinion, what are their characteristics? I'm talking about their personality? This guy didn't have a filter on his mouth, calling them Big Sister. But Kongshi didn't care about these minor details right now. Patient yet arrogant. Cautious yet self-righteous. It seems very contradictory. But there's one thing, this orthodoxy is very good at planning. Their strategies are very deep, but when they actually do it, it seems like it's 2 different things, Lu Xiaoyi agreed. That's right. This Hung River has a rash side in their actions, but they also have careful plans. In the end, they might not be very sensitive in terms of strategy, but they have some tricks up their sleeves in terms of tactics. If it was you, and you already vaguely knew 100 years ago that the realm would be attacked, what would you do? Keep waiting? Or plan from many sides? Kongshi understood. Lord Lu, you're not sure about their response? So you're hesitating here because you don't know if you can capture the main force of Hung River and finish it in one fell swoop? Lu Xiaoyi explained. No one will wait to be captured. There's no doubt about that. If it's the 5 rings, our strategy will be to attack. Make the first move and seize the initiative. If they couldn't do it due to time and distance, they would at least do it in the void of the universe, far away from the mother planet. They wouldn't let the enemy come to their doorstep. Apparently, the Hengi realm didn't choose this path. Otherwise, they would have launched a full-scale assault and broken through one of the 3 Yang Shun corporations in the alliance. For example, the 5th ring Zhou Xian's Natural Choice Group, the Luoso Heavenly Light Group, and the Floating Anchor Chain Group. But they didn't do so, and instead allowed us to gather around the Hung River. What does this mean? Kongshi pondered. I can only think of 2 reasons. The reason why Divide and Conquer was able to work in the art of war in the mortal world was because the army in the mortal world had a natural weakness when it came to gathering and transmitting information, as well as the movement speed of the army. This kind of art of war was, in fact, a battle of time. However, it was very difficult to do this in the world of cultivation. Cultivators' mobility and decisiveness were not comparable to that of mortals. Therefore, they were afraid that if they attacked one path, the other 2 would take care of them. Moreover, in the void of the universe, it was impossible to fight a war of annihilation. If they couldn't stop them, they could just run. It was very difficult to completely destroy one path. The other reason was that the Hengi orthodoxy relied too much on their sacred river, so they were unwilling to go out into the void of the universe to fight mobile battles. Actually, if you want to blame someone, you have to blame the sword vein in the alliance. In the universe, who wouldn't be afraid of your famous swordsman army? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. You have a point. We think so too. Therefore, the 3 corporations spread out to lure them to take the initiative to attack. Now it seems that it has failed. The people of Hengi Realm are very calm. Then, will they just wait passively like this? Will they do nothing? Will they entrust their hopes to the will of the heavens? Kongshi was also thinking about this problem. In fact, she had been thinking about this problem ever since the first Yang Shin team came to the Beast territory and heard the shocking news. We can only think of 2 ways. One is to send reinforcements. The other is to use tactics. Lu Xiaoyi nodded inwardly. The peacock race's brains were very useful. Yes, we can't decide on reinforcements for now. This is the core secret of the people of Hengi Realm. But if they gather Zerg and the winged people, the cultivation world of the main world will fall into a situation where everyone wants to beat them up. No matter the result of this battle, Hengi orthodoxy will definitely be targeted by the mainstream in the future. There will never be a day of peace. Then who else? No one knows. This isn't something that can be figured out by guessing. We can only guess at tactics because there are only a few moves. It's either one or the other. There has to be a direction. Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. That's why we can't be sure. If we can't be sure, we can't make a decision. We can only secretly arrange things. I can't tell Big Sister because I don't know if I'm doing the right thing or not. Kangxi finally forgave him. Then what do you think? Lu Xiaoyi said very sincerely. When we were up there, 3 pure ones, and I had already calculated the various changes that could happen once the battle started. Now that Hengi realm is taking the initiative to attack, this Dafaside is completely impossible. Then there's only one option left. Open up a new battlefield. Kangxi raised his eyebrows. 5th ring. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Yes, the 5th ring. For the Hengi realm, they can see very clearly that the foundation of this alliance is the 5th ring. Once the 5th ring leaves, after a long period of fruitless siege on the Hengi realm, I'm afraid that it will come to an end. This is their only chance to get through this alliance's siege. If they only attack and defend the Hengi realm, no matter how long they last, how can they withstand the endless reinforcements from the major forces of the origin world? Therefore, we think that they will open up a new battlefield in the 5th ring. Their goal is to force the 5th ring forces in the alliance to leave. Then, they will join forces and achieve the goal of disintegrating the entire alliance. In terms of tactics, this is the most likely goal. Kangxi was greatly enlightened. Also, if they are only in the 5th ring battlefield, they will be able to utilize the strength of the Wing Clan and the Insect Clan openly without worrying that they will be blamed by the mainstream cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi raised his eyebrows. Therefore, there aren't many young gods in the 5th ring, and their strength can't be considered tyrannical. Only 2 sword vein young gods came to put on a show. Most of the 5th ring forces are preparing for this clash on the battlefield. This alliance was formed by the 5th ring, but we didn't send out our most elite forces. Leaving our allies here because of some kind of suspicion was not a pleasant thing to say. That was why I've been thinking about the best time to speak up. I had to wait until everything was clear before speaking up. Otherwise, if I spoke up too early, it would easily cause the alliance to become unstable. Big Sister, please forgive me for thinking about this. If someone else asked me, I'm afraid I would continue to hide it. Chapter 1804. Kangxi took a deep breath and went through everything in his mind. He opened his eyes and said, Understood. The 5th ring has to focus on the offense and defense of the 5th ring. Ensure that the mother planet is not lost. No matter what the final result is, they won't be able to rush to the Hengi sector in a short time. So, the rest of us are the main force for the Hengi sector's offense and defense. Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. It's hard to fake the quantity, so we can only fake the quality. Most of the 45th ring young gods are from small and medium-sized sections. There's a gap between their combat power and the top young gods. You don't have to worry about their fighting spirit. But I also have to admit that they may not be able to play a decisive role in the main aspects. This requires the others to be more responsible and not blindly place their hopes on the 5th ring. From the perspective of dividing the forces, the 5th ring battlefield will take away some of the Hengi sector's elites. In other words, the forces you encounter in the Hengi sector won't be too unexpected. They'll mainly focus on defense. If the measures are right, even if we can't defeat them and break into the Hengi sector, it's completely possible to suppress them. Kangxi could understand what he meant. The Hengi sector's breakthrough point would be on the newly open battlefield. This was the key to ending this war. If this was the case, of course, the most elite forces would be arranged. Just like the Alliance sending young gods to attack the Hengi sector would probably send the real top forces to attack the 5th ring. It was impossible to let the wingman Zerg do whatever he wanted there. What I want to know is, in the end, how much power can we really invest in the Hengi sector? Lu Xiaoyi knew that he couldn't lie about this because it meant the extent to which the beast territory was willing to participate. The 40 young gods of the 5th ring won't return to the mother planet because they have to stay here to maintain the existence of the 5th ring's power. All of Zhou Xian and Heaven's Choice. The next step is to talk to them about this matter. To get their cooperation, they should also be the most steadfast allies. All of the anchor chains and floating sinks. If we handle this properly, they'll be a great help. Luo Sutian and Guang Ming, I don't know how far they'll go. But at least they won't betray us, because this is the decision of interior heaven. In the end, there will be dozens of interior half-immortals coming down to help you. So, as you can see, our strength is actually far stronger than Hong He. You don't have to worry too much. Kong, she sighed, although she said that her intuition told her that she believed in the fifth ring and the sword vein more. Zhou Xian's Heaven's Choice might have a good attitude, but the problem was their actual ability. They lacked the swordsman's unstoppable and invincible aura. An army must have someone like that in order to bring out the full potential of the entire army. The floating anchor chain could be used as an auxiliary force, but it would be a stretch to expect them to be decisive. Not to mention Luo, Su, and Tian Guoming. They were able to shout, and they had already won. But to hold on at the crucial moment, that was really tough. In the end, they were forced to come here. During the first great war of the universe, they in the Hengi realm were still unknown hidden allies. As for the half-immortals of the interior heaven, why did she feel that they were so unreliable? He couldn't give any concrete reason. It was just a feeling. The main force of the ancient beasts are in the fifth ring. Lu Xiao nodded. That's right. They have an advantage against the winged people insects, as they have a natural spiritual suppression. On the contrary, they will be restricted by the God Path system like the Hengi realm. So, we have to place them in the most suitable place for them. Kong Shi stared at him. Yangding won't come? Their destination is the fifth ring? Lu Xiaoi nodded. After the war, the fifth ring will announce to the universe's cultivation world that they will officially apologize to Yangding for the plundering incident in history. They will also compensate for all the losses. Yangding was going to make their future stance clear in this war. He will also have the right to receive the fifth ring's unconditional help when the realm is in trouble in the future. Kong Shi shook her head, feeling a little dazed. She had been thinking about this for decades, but he had already started paving the way 100 years ago. Moreover, the amazing thing was that he had actually done it. You really know how to cause trouble. A simple extermination of a realm was turned into a great war by you. Lu Xiaoi was also very helpless. I don't want to do this either. The key is that this kind of thing can't be hidden from others, and the Hengi realm won't just sit still and wait to be captured. It's not that I'm complicated. It's that the cultivation world is too complicated. Kong, she let out a long breath. All right, in this case, the beast territory will mobilize all of its members. We are closer, so we can send more. Among them, we can also gather 30 to 40 sun god beasts. Lu Xiaoi bowed deeply. He was very clear about the power of the peacock's promise. These beasts rarely participated in the internal conflicts between humans, but their specialty was that once they participated, they would go all out. They were not as cunning as humans. This was a power that could be relied on at critical moments, not just for show. This was the reason why he was the first to explain to Kong Shi. Good. History will prove that your choice was not wrong. The Black Dragon race will act together with you. In terms of bloodline, there will be no separation between you. Also, that Black Dragon head is a bit perverted. If there's anything, you could discuss it. For orthodoxy like the Hengi realm, sometimes you need to, not be too old-fashioned. Kong Shi understood what he meant. That was, don't be too square in battle. You need to be unscrupulous and break the limits of shamelessness. In this aspect, the peacock race was not good at it, and Hong Yin was not good either. They could only rely on the Black Dragon head. She was a bit unwilling, but her long life made her understand that Lu Xiaoi was doing this purely out of good intentions. Whether it was for the so-called face and tradition, or for the lower casualties, the choice was not difficult to make. Will you stay? This was what she was interested in. Although she felt that this relative was not very reliable when she first met him. After thinking about it, she couldn't help but be impressed by this person's powerful strength, far-reaching plans, and ruthless methods. Lu Xiaoi was a bit distressed. This is what I'm worried about. It seems like there's a reason to stay on either side. If I stay on the fifth ring and break their dream of dividing the battlefield, I'll naturally take care of the Hengi realm. If I stay here, I'll directly attack the Hengi realm. Then their so-called dividing the battlefield would be meaningless. There's no clear priority. Actually, the best way is to see the strength of both sides. Wherever the Hengi realm is weak, I should go there to fight for a quick solution. But who knows the layout of the Hengi realm? Where is the center of their strength? A war that has been planned since 100 years ago. No matter how much I calculate, I still don't understand the result. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have invited anyone. Just a 5-ring Yang God's 100-year attack and directly catch them off guard. Kong, she shook her head. No, you won't do that, because doing so may achieve the most perfect surprise in terms of tactics. But your 5th ring will lose its strategic purpose. If you can ambush others today, others will ambush you one day. In the end, it will become a world of ordinary people who like to fight. There will be fewer and fewer friends around you. So few that even our peacock race won't dare to get too close to you. Is this what you need? Therefore, it may be very difficult, but with the glorious momentum in hand, the more friends you fight, the more allies you have. This is the trend of the world. The battle of a universe is a process. It's a competition of who can laugh in the end, not just for a moment. Chapter 1805. Outside the 5th ring, there was a desolate star a few months away. From afar, it looked no different from an ordinary desolate star, but only when one got close to this desolate star could one understand its mysteries. On the sunless side of the desolate star, in the bumpy giant craters, there were also densely packed cultivators. 30 young gods and hundreds of God primordial soul true lords were almost all of Yang Ding's strength. Yang Ding domain, after being entangled with the 5th ring for nearly 2,000 years, finally made their final choice in the chaos of the universe. They chose to stand with the strong. They chose to forget their hatred and focus on the future. There were too many reasons for this. Compared to the main world's Buddhist orthodoxy, the power of the 5th ring was as strong as ever. Half-immortal monsters appeared one after another in the 5th ring. The tacit agreement of several main worlds, including the inverse space's Heaven's Choice continent, and so on, were all subtly influencing their views. They weren't blind, and they saw these changes in their eyes. In fact, it was only natural for them to stand on one side. The only thing they lacked was face. Now, the 5th ring gave them face. The 5th ring monsters solved the deep-rooted problem of the domain for millions of years for them. The higher-ups of the 5th ring agreed to clear their names and admit their mistakes. Such an opportunity would only come once. There wouldn't be another one in the future. And this time, it was time for them to prove themselves. If you want to get the respect of others, you have to show the corresponding ability. Kong Yangzi and Yu Yang stood in the sky above the desolate star, filled with emotions. Looking at the huge 5th ring domain in the distance, it was like a monster floating in the void, hideous and ugly. It was once a nightmare that they couldn't get rid of. They thought that one day they would come with their troops, but they never thought it would be in such a way. Life was like a dream, and cultivation was really a drama. Even the boldest screenwriter wouldn't dare to write such a story, right? But in the world of cultivation, such changes were happening all the time. It was challenging the bottom line of humanity. Soon, right? I'm getting a little anxious from waiting. As the helmsman of Yang Ding, Kong Yangzi had always been known for his calm and wise demeanor. He would only occasionally show a trace of his true nature in front of his senior brothers who were older than him. Yu Yang didn't look at him. After thousands of years of friendship, they were too familiar with each other. In these few years, I have a hunch. It should be the great Tao of Buddhism. There are only a few, so there's no need to guess. Kong Yangzi laughed. Senior martial brother's premonition has always been the most accurate. So, in your opinion, is it a blessing or a curse for us to attack Yang Ding this time? Yu Yang was very serious. Do you really want me to guess? You might not be satisfied. Kong Yangzi's heart tightened. Is it a disaster? Yu Yang, however, shook his head. It's either one or the other. Your mentality is wrong. Actually, there's a third possibility, which is where my intuition lies. This time, we may not be in the main direction, and we may not be able to play a decisive role. Kong Yangzi was speechless. This guess was indeed terrible. He had come in such a menacing manner, only to pounce on nothing. He couldn't even find a place to exert his strength. This was not what he wanted. The two of them remained silent as they looked at the starry sky. In the cultivation world, who could predict the outcome until the very end? In most cases, the answers given by the heavenly Tao were always unexpected. In silence, time passed quietly, and a small planet floated over from outside the desolate planet. It was a gaseous planet. There were all kinds of strange things in the void of the universe. Planets were not necessarily solid. There were also gaseous or liquid planets. Their unifying characteristic was that they were huge in size, but their mass was not necessarily the same. Inside the planet, wonderful changes were happening all the time. Because the fifth ring was moving, the meteorite that Yang Ding and the other cultivators lived in moved together under the attraction of the fifth ring. So, in fact, they couldn't figure out whether the planet was moving or they themselves were moving. Such a planet was not rare in the void of the universe. As Yang spirit cultivators, the two of them didn't feel much novelty about it. The reason why they paid attention to it was because they both felt something special. There was a cultivator on that gaseous planet. Many cultivators chose to cultivate in extreme celestial phenomena. They challenged their limits in such a dangerous situation. But now, this cultivator on the planet was obviously more daring. This was not just cultivation, but the upper realm. Not only was he in the upper realm, but he was also dragging a Yang spirit void beast with him. This position was already very close to the fifth ring. No void beast would easily set foot here. When a behemoth of the fifth ring flew close, as long as they were not stupid, they would choose to leave and hide. The appearance of the Yang spirit void beast here was very strange. But what was even more strange was the cultivator who was in the upper realm. Was this the right environment? The two Yang Ding Taoists didn't move. Thousands of years of cultivation had already made them lose the so-called curiosity. Their only purpose was to hide themselves well and appear at a suitable time in the future where they were needed the most, not to be a hero for a certain idea. So they just watched and didn't have any intention of intervening. As they watched, the distance was getting closer and closer, and they could make a basic judgment about the changes inside the planet. Reincarnation. It's the Tao of reincarnation. This person is using it to climb up the primordial spirit. Kong Yangzi was a little envious. Yang Ding's choice of cultivators over the years had been relatively simple. Limited by the environment, he couldn't let 100 flowers bloom. However, this situation would change in the future. Only when there were more ways could a realm be powerful. The Yang God Void Beast was constantly in attack mode. Such a dangerous upper realm method was not recognized by the mainstream. It was a risk. It was completely a joke with life. The environment wasn't right, and there was also external harassment. Using a Yang Spirit Void Beast to sharpen his own reincarnation realm. If he didn't control it well, he would fall into true reincarnation. They couldn't move because a Yang Spirit Void Beast appeared here, and it was very likely that it had other purposes. For a cultivator legion, hiding was always the first element. They watched for another year and regarded the asteroid as a large planet. The distance between them was very close. Until one day, the internal gas of the entire asteroid underwent a violent change, as if a storm had erupted. Even the entire shape of the planet was changing. At this moment, there was a sword whistle, and then endless sword light gushed out from the asteroid. The Yang Spirit Void Beast probably felt that something was wrong and desperately tried to break free, but it was torn to pieces under the extremely sharp sword light. Yu Yang and Kong Yangzi looked at each other and suddenly understood. It was indeed a sword lunatic. Even an upper realm cultivator had chosen such a crazy method. The Void Beast turned into nothingness, and a clear voice sounded. If the spirit is willing, we will meet again in the next life. If the spirit is willing, take me back to Xian Yuan. Chapter 1806. A sword light leaped out of the planet, glanced at the desolate star, and then left. Looking at the direction, it was the fifth ring not far away. Kang Yangzi was stunned for a long time, and then he shook his head and sighed. Such a person and a woman. Many men can't compare to her heroic spirit. There are many such people in the fifth ring. Brother, it seems that we made the right choice. Yu Yang was silent for a long time, and then he smiled bitterly. Don't worry. As long as our Dafa is right, such a person will appear in the sun top one day. Kang Yangzi said again, this person's upper state seems a bit strange, and it's not completely primordial spirit. I always feel that there's something wrong with it. This time, it was Yu Yang's turn to sigh. There's nothing wrong with your feeling, because this female swordsman not only reached the upper state of primordial spirit, but she also took a step forward. Kang Yangzi was speechless. The sword vein produced two monsters? Could it be that after the change of the universe era, the next rebirth of the universe would be the first year of the sword vein? Since she was a swordsman and appeared in this place, she must be from the sword vein. It didn't matter whether they were discovered or not. They were in contact with the fifth ring, so they could cooperate tacitly when something happened. Not to mention the two young Dingyang gods sighing. The sword light was rushing and whistling. If she didn't do that, she wouldn't be able to express her feelings. Breaking the realm was relatively dangerous, but for Yin Cheng, it was a step she had to take. She didn't want to wait any longer, and she didn't want to put everything on other people's shoulders, even if it was her closest brother. Over the years, she had been reflecting on herself. Why did her originally cheerful personality become more and more radical? Other people's state of mind became more and more stable as they cultivated, but she was the opposite. Before she built her foundation, she was a gentle little girl, and after she built her foundation, she became known for her straightforwardness. When she was in Jindan, she was very self-conscious, and when she was in Yuanying, she had become a big sister. Outside the dome, except for one of her brothers and sisters in the same realm, the others subconsciously regarded her as the leader. This was a kind of temperament, and it wasn't entirely because of strength. Until true monarch, she resolutely came to the azure sky and began to do as she pleased. Now that he had reached the immortal soul stage and even taken a step forward, he finally understood why all of this was happening. She was a reincarnated body, and one that reincarnated frequently. That was why she had different insights on the great Tao of reincarnation. Even after being reincarnated several times, he was still the same person. His true spirit had never abandoned the sword vein, completing a qualitative leap. In her past cultivation, the highest cultivation level she had ever achieved was primordial divinity. Now, she had reached that level and even surpassed it. Countless memories surged into her mind, and she understood her current situation, the situation at the dome. This was also the heavenly Tao's reward for not abandoning her. This was her talent, as well as her willpower. Why was she able to successfully take a step forward this time, instead of running into a wall back and forth between the true monarch level like before? He hadn't been able to figure it out in his previous lives, but now that he had taken this step, he finally understood. This time, no one had exerted any additional influence on her growth. If there was one, it would be a perverted guy who would always show off in front of her with bad intentions. She had never stopped wanting to catch up with him and beat him up. In reincarnation, it might not be a good thing to have the help of close old friends of the sect. Unfortunately, the swordsmen didn't understand this very well. They were always especially enthusiastic towards their old friends who had returned. It had been 20,000 years. She could finally truly contribute to the sect. She was no longer a dispensable character among the large group of swordsmen, leaving behind the reputation of having an unchanging reincarnated heart. But in reality, she hadn't really made any significant contributions. This was the will of the heavens, and also her own perseverance. In this turbulent era, when she was needed the most, she had returned. However, how many of those old friends of hers were left? Memories surged into her mind, but at the same time, they brought with them endless sadness. She somewhat understood Li Wuya's actions back then. When you don't have those familiar faces by your side, only endless loneliness and sadness would remain in the depths of your heart. Sadness was unavoidable, but it had to be passed as soon as possible, because the sword vein still needed her. When she took this step, coupled with her experience as a Xianyuan swordsman and the changes in the universe in the past few hundred years, she had her own judgment, a judgment that was not the same as others. Lu Xiaoyi, this little macaque, had done a good deed. He was even more troublesome than Li Wuya back then. The key was that she had to clean up this macaque's mess. On Crow Peak, a few Yang gods were in a meeting. Guandu and Guangbo were the ones leading the team to Hengyi Boundary. The rest were led by Guanshan, Heku, Gongyao, and Shanting. This was a necessary division. Guandu had to go. If he didn't go, Xuanyuan's alliance this time would be too fake. The plan had been drawn up 100 years ago, and it had been refining for 100 years. There were also many boundaries close to the fifth ring that were secretly mobilizing here. It was better to be safe than sorry. Before the battle at Hengyi Boundary, anything could happen. War was a cautious art. It was not something that could be solved by rushing and fighting. The power of the fifth ring had actually been weakened after the last great battle. The elites that had been lost could not be replenished in just a few hundred years. Moreover, 40 Yang gods had gone to Hengyi Boundary this time. Even if most of them were Yang god from small and medium-sized sects, the division of power was inevitable. Another thing was that they had no intention of giving up on the blue sky this time, so they had made arrangements in the blue sky, especially the three pure ones in Xianyuan. The Yang spirit was not here. It was to preside over the blue sky, just in case something unexpected happened. Their strength had decreased, and they had to divide their forces twice. This made the Xianyuan people very depressed. Two great battles. One was passive, and the other was active. Why do I feel so uncomfortable every time? Why do I feel like I can't enjoy myself to the fullest? Have we regressed? Or was the Xianyuan of Crow ancestors' era too strong? Heku complained, because he could not go to Hengyi Boundary. He had been complaining endlessly for 100 years. Among the swordsmen present, there were many who had the same thoughts as him. It was just that he was the first to speak. Guanshan snorted. Be careful with your words. Don't casually compare the present with the past. How can they be compared? In Crow ancestors' era, the universe was not in chaos. Even the Celestial Wolf expedition was just a slightly larger realm war. How can it be compared to the current universe war? How many powerful realms of the universe were involved? How many are there now? The entire eastern elephant sky was involved, including the northern elephant sky and the interior sky. What kind of concept is this? You all know the history very well. It is recorded clearly. Even if the Celestial Wolf expedition is bragging about how great it is now, how many mistakes were made? How many people were lost? In the Battle of the Asteroid Belt, almost 50% of them were lost. Later, in order to boost morale, they boasted that it was unprecedented. Back then, Lu Ancestor said that it was just a messy invasion. They only won because they had the upper hand. However, the process was full of mistakes. This is also the truth. Chapter 1807. Everyone was speechless. History was always beautified and distorted as time passed. However, as the top level of Xianyuan, they shouldn't be misled. Guanshan didn't let them go. Do you know how many five-ring sword Vayne lost in the counterattack of Sirius because some half-immortals came from the interior world? Later, Crow Ancestor admitted his responsibility in his autobiography that he didn't control the rhythm of the battle. I want to make it clear to you that in the cultivation world, there is no such thing as cutting melons and vegetables. If you think this way, then it means that the thousands of years of prosperity have made you hallucinate. There has never been a smooth sailing in the cultivation war. Uncomfortable? That's right. If you don't feel uncomfortable when you want to slaughter a world and destroy a Tao, then our 5 rings, our sword vein, should have unified the universe and become the only voice of the universe. Is it realistic? Do you think others cultivate fake Tao? Guanshan said earnestly, don't think that the entire universe is 5-ringed and belongs to us. In this chaotic era of the universe, we will continue to endure such discomfort. This is the essence of a great battle. Looking down on all the mountains? Dream on. Do you think you are writing a novel? Ruling the universe, and all the worlds will come to you? As long as we walk on the right path of competition and always keep the same direction, then such discomfort will become less and less. Suffering losses is not scary. What is scary is that you don't know why you suffered losses. You think it was your own carelessness, that it was a coincidence, that it was lax. Last time we suffered losses because of the strength of our opponent. In this cultivation world, we can't take everything as we please. It's that simple. They had to admit that Guanshan was a sensible person. He was very clear about Xuanyuan's position. Crow ancestors' greatness lay in himself, and not the entire Xianyuan sword vein. It wasn't enlightening because no one could be enlightened. This was just a normal conversation between them. Some wanted to be more carefree, while others wanted to be calmer. As they expressed their opinions, they felt an aura approaching. Crow Peak didn't set up any defenses against monarch-level cultivators. In fact, there was no special forbidden area on the dome except for Xuanyuan's scabbard. However, it wasn't the few primordial spirits they were familiar with, but a Kuin cultivator who rarely came here. He had already ascended to the primordial soul stage. There was also a trace of an indescribably strange aura. The young gods were stunned for a moment before they were overjoyed. Xianyuan was starting to show his strength in the second half of the game. Monstrous geniuses appeared frequently. To tell the truth, that fellow Lu Xiaoyi was really too good at stirring up trouble. Although this kind of person was full of vigor and dared to fight as the leader of a sect, in the end, he still wasn't reliable enough. Now, that 2 people from Xianyuan had taken the first step, and they were both in the primordial spirit stage. They could make up for each other. Through discussion, there would be restraints, and they could remind each other to not let this big ship of Xianyuan sail into madness. They had all been young spirits for thousands of years. It was hard to say whether they could take that step before the end of the era. Right now, the ancient method was flourishing, but to them, whether or not they could make this turn was a problem. When the era changed, Xianyuan would definitely be led by these 2 people. It would be much more stable than if there was only one person. Shang Ting was the first to speak. Junior sister Yinqing has peeked into the Great Way. Congratulations. Such an achievement makes us blush with shame. Yinqing returned the greetings one by one. Her mood was complicated. Once upon a time, when she had successfully reincarnated for the first time, she had seen familiar figures. That touching and anticipation had been unparalleled. She had only thought that she could fight side by side with everyone again. But now these fellow disciples were still familiar, but it was a different feeling. She walked to the seat of honor and said in a firm tone, I have an objection to the plan. It needs to be changed. The young gods were very surprised. This was not in line with the rules. Although the primordial spirit could already compete with them and had endless potential in the future, at the moment, such a realm was actually only on par with the young gods. Her combat strength might not be as good as theirs, so how could she dare to boast so shamelessly? Even that madman Lu Xiaoyi had never dared to put on such airs in front of them. He had to be respectful to his seniors. Was this woman too happy to succeed in the upper realm that her brain had been fried? There was always a process for the transfer of power. Even if Lu Xiaoyi held the broken sword, it was still the same, not to mention that this woman's ability and contribution were far inferior to Lu Xiaoyi's. Guanshan reacted the fastest and immediately understood. This time, it was not a salute between peers, but a great salute to an elder. Congratulations to senior sister Bulien for returning to Xianyuan. We are all your juniors. We have listened to your story and cultivated all the way here. If you have any errands, Please tell us. The remaining few also understood. Luzu was looking for senior sister Bu Lian's reincarnation. This was no secret to the Yang gods, but they didn't expect that it would be this Yinqing. They didn't know why, but by a freak combination of factors, she was left out. Perhaps this was also the reason why Lu Zhu hadn't returned to the mountain in the past 2,000 years. Knowing that it was this great aunt, they had originally thought that Xian Yuan would go more smoothly. This great aunt had always been known for being swift and decisive and unscrupulous in the history of Xian Yuan. In the past few reincarnations, there were still people above who could suppress her. But now, other than that Lu Xiaoyi, who could make her give in? A big scourge, and now a crazy woman. What should they do? Yinqing didn't care what they thought. Her personality had never changed even after several reincarnations. She was straightforward and never hid anything. Lu Xiaoyi was right to attack Hung River. His strategy was right, but his tactics were **T. In the end, after 100 years of planning, he still made his hometown unstable. It was clearly an initiative, but now it has become passive. Tell me, isn't this? Everyone nodded and agreed. That's right. Lu Xiaoyi is **T. Yinqing continued to show her power. You guys are the same. You let him mess around. Don't you know how to fill in the gaps? I even have to wipe his ass for him. Let's cut to the chase. In my opinion, the real goal of Hung River Jie may not be the fifth ring. The fifth ring is so big and has so many cultivators. How can it be so easily shaken? If they really set their goal here, the first thing they need is a huge number of cultivators. Hung River Jie can't even protect itself. Where can they find so many people? Without a large number of human cultivators, can they just rely on those winged insects? Seeing that everyone was deep in thought, Yinqing didn't hold back. You might not have thought of these problems. It's not like they haven't appeared before. Why didn't you remind me? Because you weren't sure? Or did you not dare to take responsibility? When did Xuanyuan's yang spirit become afraid of making a mistake and not even dare to speak out for his own face? Even if he, Lu Xiaoyi, has the broken sword head, can he call the shots? If he does something wrong, I'll take away his broken sword head and make him face the wall to reflect on his past. These words are the same to me. Just because I reincarnated a few more times, you treat me like an ancestor? I'm just a junior who just entered the essence soul realm. You should talk and teach me a lesson. What does past experience have to do with this life? She smashed the star map. Here, blue sky. This is their real goal. Now, tell me your opinions. I don't listen to flattery. I only respect honest people. Chapter 1808. The blue sky was still beautiful. If you could relax, your beauty would increase by 3 points. The ice guest swordsman was lying on the beach of a beautiful island in the Thousand Islands region, feeling that life was so beautiful. The sun was shining, the sea breeze was cool, the sky was blue, and the shadows of the sails were dancing. On the beach, there were laughing beauties playing and running. In the Thousand Islands region, which was originally a very open place on this private beach, was there anything more pleasant than this? Under the palm trees behind the beach, several people were preparing a barbecue. Fresh spirit beast meat, chilled wine. Most importantly, the long life cycle allowed him to incomparably enjoy all of this. Since he succeeded in becoming a supreme in the Swanee treasure ship, his life suddenly became happy. He stayed in the blue sky, standing aloof from worldly affairs. He could do what he wanted to do and did not have to bear those endless tasks. Here, he was the top existence, enjoying the envious gazes of many practitioners. Therefore, he bought an island here and became the owner of the island. Of course, he could only come here for 2 months in a year. For the rest of the time, he had to report back to Shao Mountain. Originally, he could stay here and enjoy life for the whole year. However, ever since senior brother Zhizhong came, he became more strict. Fortunately, he could still take a break for 2 months and relax the inexplicable tension that came from nowhere. Nervous for nothing. I'm someone who has seen the world. Since the first Five Rings War, the East Heaven main world's Buddhism ran into a wall here. Whether it was the people of the Five Rings world or the people of the Blue Sky world, they became very confident, and pride returned to them. For a supreme like the Ice Guest Swordsman, it was not that he did not know the chaos of the universe, but he also knew the painful changes before the arrival of the new era. But this seemed to have nothing to do with him. He was just a supreme who was matured in the Swanee treasure ship and was destined to have no fate with the upper realm. In the remaining 1,000 years, the universe might not be able to undergo earth-shaking changes, and some small troubles would not be able to affect this place. Could he find a stronger enemy than the East Heaven Main world? So, for him, the most important thing was to enjoy life. He wasn't that ambitious. Speaking of which, with his strength, he really couldn't support too high of an ambition. It would be better for him to play some small games that everyone liked to play under the bright and beautiful sun with some sensible and tactful beauties. Here he was the king, not only this small island, but also the Thousand Islands region. There weren't many who dared to talk to him directly. Safety, safety, they had always emphasized safety. For hundreds of years, the wolf had come countless times, but he had never seen the real thing. He had long gotten used to the rhythm of scaring himself. As the sea breeze blew, he gradually felt sleepy. This was azure sky. Not just anyone would dare to come here and act presumptuously. There was no need to be so tense all the time. Sleeping like a mortal was his favorite thing to do. While he was half awake, he vaguely sensed a presence passing by above the island. This was very normal. There were many cultivators here, and he was not so overbearing as to ban flying above the island. Occasionally, strange cultivators with unknown backgrounds would come here to cause trouble, and he could still pretend to be a nobody and live a good life. If you don't pretend to be strong in cultivation, you'll be struck by lightning. But this presence paused above the island. This was normal. The island was very beautiful. How could the things that he ice guest sword had his eyes on be bad? But what happened next was not normal. Sensing the fluctuation of spiritual vigor, huge waves of more than 10 feet high rose up from the shore, like a tsunami rolling towards the shore. The beauty screamed and fled in all directions. The heaven-like place instantly became a place of devastation for nature. Ice Guest Sword did not dodge. What was the significance of a tsunami to a supreme like him? It was just to wash his face. He did not even release his divine sense to wake the other party, afraid that this reckless fellow would run away. He had to be washed by water. Then he would have a reason to pretend to be a nobody and teach this arrogant fellow a lesson. The huge waves came as expected, washing away the beauties, and even the barbecue rack behind the palm tree. Ice Guest's sword did not move, and did not even open his eyes. But in his heart he was angry. Did they think that he, Ice Guest's sword, had a good temper? Then a voice scolded, "I'll beat you up. Why are you still pretending to be a big turtle? Get up quickly and follow me back to the mountain." Ice Guest's sword jumped up. Because he heard the voice, he could no longer pretend. The other party was the same as him, a true swordsman of Xianyuan. After thousands of years of entanglement, they knew each other very well. "Young Manly, I'm on vacation. Don't bother me with those trivial matters. The rules of Mount E are that I have the right to take a 2-month vacation. You have no right to order me around." The figure in the sky ignored him and left, leaving behind a voice. "There's a message from Mount E. Big Sister will be here soon. It doesn't matter if you go or not. But when you're in trouble, don't expect me to plead for you." Ice Guest Sword was shocked, and he jumped up and ran. As he ran, he transmitted his voice to the front. "Big Sister is coming? Big Brother didn't come, right? But no matter who comes, I think our good days are coming to an end. This time, I'm afraid we won't be able to keep our lives. Why are you running so fast? Wait for me." The two of them flew all the way. When they neared the sky above the north region, they saw sword traces flashing in the sky. Everyone was running back with all their might. They were very clear that Senior Brother Zhizhong was only here to preside over the daily affairs and to guard against any danger. There might not be a real battle, but if the Dome sect continued to send people, then it was not just a possibility. There would definitely be a big battle. Only Big Sister is coming? Ice Guest's sword still had a glimmer of hope. Li Peinan looked at him contemptuously. I don't know. I heard that more than 10 floating rafts came. They were all filled with people. Or maybe it's Big Sister's dowry. Ice Guest's sword complained his heart. The Dome sect had sent people over. This was not a small fight. They were going to be serious. Damn it. Why was it so hard to enjoy life? Just as the two of them and the other true immortals and nascent soul cultivators returned to the territory of Mount Shao, the atmosphere in the distance began to tremble violently. Ripples were stirred up on the surface of the heaven and earth. Amidst the turbulence of the spiritual vigor, one after another, enormous ships rushed out from the clouds and headed straight for Thousand Elegance Peak. These were treasured ships, not ordinary floating rafts. It was not a small group that returned, but the main force. Ice Guest's sword chattered. Young Li, when we return, let's go and ask Big Sister if the fifth ring is still lacking people. Why don't we ask that last Xiaoya first? I don't think it's good, very bad. Young Li was furious. If you want to ask, go ask. Why should I go and make a fool of myself? Since a few decades ago, I've been asking you if we should return to the fifth ring together. There are many thighs there. You, King, said it was safe here, and there was no battle at the rear. Now, no one will be able to escape. Chapter 1809. The people coming from the dome were more orderly than the two of them had imagined, which meant that the situation was more serious than they had imagined. Not only did Big Sister Yin Shang come, there were also a few Sun Spirit Supremes. This was almost all of Xuanyuan's strength. The big shots still had a lot of important things to discuss, and the small shots had their own ways. The two of them quickly found the beautiful Supreme Xiaoya, but now they had to call her senior sister. Senior sister, Xiaoya, I missed you so much. Do you still remember the fun we had when we went on a trip together? Of course. Ice Guest would not go straight to the point. Instead, she first tried to make friends and talk about the past. Li Sheng was disdainful. Xiaoya, ignore him. There are not many people who can live until now after knowing this guy. If it weren't for me, people like him who can destroy their masters and ancestors should be hanged on the snow mountain to warn others. Although he was scolding, he was actually reminding Huang Xiaoya that he had saved her many times. At the critical moment, he had to help them. Huang Xiaoya shook her head and smiled bitterly. It was a miracle that these two clowns could survive until now. Their talents were limited. They could still survive in Qin Kong, but it was normal that they could not show their abilities at all when they reached the dome. Because in the end, they relied on the realm, on the Swan and I treasure ship, and the opening of the Tao of Heaven. So in terms of strength and mentality, they could not reach the level of a normal Xianyuan swordsman. There were many such people in Xianyuan sword sect. The two of them were a little vague. She knew that this was mainly because of their personality. Some people were afraid of difficulties and easy. In fact, they did not really want to be deserters, but because they lacked confidence, they always wanted to take on easier tasks. All right, you two don't have to pretend to be pitiful here. Let me tell you, Sister Yin judged that the direction of the enemy's attack could still be Qin Kong. Therefore, after the discussion, the higher-ups of the fifth ring reached an agreement. It was not easy to command or coordinate the reinforcements, so they simply let the Xianyuan sword sect return to Qin Kong and have the power to mobilize the entire left Zhou star system. The fifth ring was defended by other sects, so the dome was actually empty. The two of you can't go back either. The decision to choose the 5 rings was a combination of many factors, a result of weighing the pros and cons. In fact, it was difficult to make a clear bias between the blue sky and the 5 rings. After all, this was not everyone's home planet. It was only the headquarters of the 3 pure ones and Tai in Xianyuan. Smokian's judgment did not receive everyone's approval. In the eyes of many fifth ring people, as an old planet that had long since become history, it was inappropriate to place too much emphasis on the significance of blue sky. However, the blue sky 3 factions' insistence had already been seen. Therefore, they had no choice but to compromise. The initiator, Xianyuan sword sect, would be solely responsible for the direction of the blue sky. The 3 pristine ones and tidy ones would still focus on the 5 rings. This was the most appropriate decision. It would be better for one sect to act alone than to gather some people from each sect. The swordsman was the most suitable orthodoxy for this task. In such a situation, no swordsman could stay out of it. Of course, no one thought that way either. It was just that some people had lived a comfortable life for too long and were trembling in fear. After talking for so long, who exactly is our enemy? Ice Guest Sword was very vague. They were in blue sky and did not have much information. They did not have enough control over the overall situation of the universe. Of course, the main reason was that they did not care at all. People of Hengi, yes, this is the main body. We can't rule out the involvement of the winged ones in Zerg. Which one do you like? Huang Xiaoya asked with a smile. Ice Guest Sword was dumbfounded. People of Hengi? Never heard of them. I don't like any of them. The humans are too cunning, the winged ones are too cruel, and there are too many insects. Huang Xiaoya shrugged. Actually, we've only heard of them and have never seen them. It's all the same. However, Senior Brother Liu has made a small booklet of the characteristics of Hengi orthodoxy. There are more detailed introductions inside. You guys can go and get a booklet later. This is a life-saving item. Don't be careless. Ice Guest Sword let out a howl. As expected, it's still Master Lu's doing. I knew it. If Master Lu doesn't kill for a day, his whole body will itch. The bigger the scene, the more excited he gets. Young Li, I don't know if you and I can survive this. Young Li gritted his teeth. My life is in my hands, not the heavens. Yin Cheng directly led this time's reinforcement operation. It wasn't entirely because she had stepped into the next realm, but because of the keen sense of war that she had honed through several lifetimes. She had a deep understanding of the post-Crow era. She had also gone through countless life and death situations and fought side by side with those legendary figures. She had the courage to take responsibility for her actions and the courage to face them. All of this made her disdainful of all the old rules and customs, such as seniority, self-preservation, caution in speech and action, and not doing a good job. This was a precious quality that only people who had truly experienced great battles could have. In today's Xianyuan sword sect, it was especially precious. The 5-ring sect had been the most powerful sect for nearly 20,000 years. The relatively peaceful passage of time made the people of the 5-ring sect lack a kind of temperament compared to their predecessors. Even if they were still tough, still hunting and looting, but looting and war were two different concepts. The universe was changing, and so were people. Nothing could be maintained at the peak forever. This didn't conform to the laws of heaven, nor did it conform to the laws of nature. Everything existed according to a sinusoidal curve. In the long river of time, there were peaks and valleys. This had nothing to do with the people or things themselves. It was the result of the environment, the situation, and many other factors. Often, when people were at the bottom, they couldn't feel it. But once there was a change, their true colors would be revealed. The important thing was not to be at the peak forever. That was impossible. The important thing was to be able to survive at the bottom and then quickly adjust to the peak when there was a change. Xianyuan was lucky. In front of them, there was Lu Xiaoyi, and behind them, there was Bu Lian. At this time, the ability of a leader was the only beacon that could bring everyone out of the bottom. Although the two of them had their own shortcomings, like sometimes being immature and sometimes being rash, no one was born a leader. The key was that they were rapidly improving and maturing. Not only them, but also the swordsmen of Xianyuan sword sect. When the two leaders were real lions, in time, they were destined to return to their original appearances and eventually become a group of lions, allowing Xianyuan to reach the peak again. If this time node could be stuck before and after the change of the era, they would be the creators of Xuanyuan's history. This was the growth of heroes, the birth of legends. It wasn't that they were born different from the rest. This kind of life would only exist in the imagination of biographers. The important thing was that they were walking on the right path. History would write a glorious chapter for them, but this time and place, it was full of loopholes. The heroes were still busy filling the holes and wiping there, but this was the real history. Chapter 1810. The reason why I chose to come here is because very few people can understand the true meaning of clear sky to Xianyuan. It was here that Big Stickly began to stir up the universe. Now, it's Little Stick Lou's turn. Smoky Puppet's words were a bit disrespectful because she didn't respect Crow Ancestor. But in Xianyuan now, only she had the qualifications to speak like that because she was once Big Stick Lee's senior sister and now Little Stick Lou's senior sister. A senior sister is half a mother. The changes of the universe all start here. In a sense, this is the source of the universe's changes. There is Xianyuan, there is the three pure ones, and there is Supreme. Therefore, Zhuozhou's significance in the changing of eras is extraordinary. There are people in Hengi who have great wisdom, or they received a reminder from a high and mighty existence. How to dig them out is the Stick's business. Our mission is defend clear sky, defend Zhuozhou. Smoky Puppet's sharp eyes swept across everyone's faces. I know many of you have different opinions in your hearts. It's okay. Xianyuan never punishes people for their opinions. But in wartime, if you have no opinions, you must go. If you have opinions, you must go. Everyone finally understood the legendary senior sister Bu Lian's domineering aura. She was someone who fought side by side with Crow Ancestor. Once, Crow Ancestor couldn't do anything to her. Now, after so many years, she became a mother-in-law. Xuanyuan's current three carriages were Lu Xiaoi, Chong Lu, and Bulian. Without mentioning the problem of strength, Granny Bulian was also Chong Lu's senior sister. She was the one who grew up, so in terms of potential, Lu Xiaoi was the most promising. In terms of strength, Lu Ancestor was the most powerful, but in terms of experience, no one could surpass this fiery granny. She had died many times for Xianyuan. Just this point alone was enough to make her kneel. We have obtained the authorization of the fifth ring, allowing us to integrate the power of the entire Zhuozhou. Now we have to do a few things. Dispatch messengers to establish strike forces in the major worlds of Zhuozhou as soon as possible, with the monarchs as the main force. Demarcate the airspace and don't let go of any abnormalities. Establish information transmission channels to ensure that we can receive news of the enemy as soon as possible. All Xianyuan swordsmen perfected monarchs were to be on standby in the air, ready to move out at any time. Leaving the realm defense to the inner realm cultivators was their responsibility. Looking at Smoky Horse moving swiftly above, the people below opened their mouths wide. Iceman Sword could not believe his eyes. I say, Youngly, what's going on? The head of the Xianyuan family had changed to a big sister? Shouldn't it be big brother? Or did Xianyuan change to husband and wife? Li Shishir was also confused. I don't know. Time is like a shackle. An old hen turns into a duck. Why do I feel like Big Sister's aura is even stronger than Big Brother's? Scammers, our luck is pretty good. We're hugging the thickest thighs in the sect. In the future, you'll be able to do whatever you want inside and outside the sect. The Iceman Sword was more clear-headed than him. Dream on. It was true that their legs were the thickest, but they also liked to walk into dangerous places the most. Are you sure you have the ability to keep up? Maybe their leg hair will be fine, but if we hug their legs like this, we'll be dead. The two people below muttered. Smoky Horse's tone changed, and his gaze shot over. Iceman Sword, Li Peinan, the two of you have been walking in the blue sky for a long time, so you're familiar with the path. The few left peripheral realms outside the big and small intestine blind paths will be left to the two of you to contact. Soldiers are trained for 1,000 days to be used for a single moment. You're used to being idle in the blue sky, so it's time to go out and do something for the sect. How could the two of them dare to say no? Under the gaze of hundreds of Xianyuan perfected monarchs, they could not collapse, but they were really unwilling to go. It was not that they were afraid of the risk. They had walked this path many times when they were Yuaniing. There was no reason for them to be afraid now that they were perfected monarchs. I won't wait for the enemy to come to my door and then rely on the world grand membrane to stop the enemy. I won't wait until I know the enemy's strength before attacking. That's the art of war for mortals, not for cultivators, and definitely not for swordsmen. Find them, and destroy them. If we can't do it, it only means that we don't deserve to have a place in the universe. According to this principle, the entire left periphery will form a tight surveillance network, and we'll attack as we find out. This time, it's about the time when the 13th Great Tao collapses. But we have to consider that the enemy may come earlier. Smoky Horse's arrangement was actually a typical swordsman's characteristic. It was not clever, but it was violent destruction. After reincarnating for several lifetimes, she had never had the experience of arranging specific tactics. Just like in her previous era, Dafa was very clear about the direction, but was careless in small areas, of course. More specific measures would be done by cultivators who were good at this, such as Lu Feng, Guangming, Zhou Fan, Song Rong, and the others. This was also a kind of accumulation of experience. Their group was also the group that would really take up the responsibility in the future. Smoky Horse, very Dafa, handed over the specific strategy to her subordinates. Then, she saw the two fellows who had been winking at each other. Alas, as long as it was related to Little Stick Lu, most of them were like this, very unreliable. But she still valued the relationship between them. Her former friends were no longer there, and now she only had a few friends, including these two living treasures. She once led them to wander around the void of the left periphery. It was also a rare happy life in her cultivation life. She came to the two of them. "What? Are you not satisfied with the task I assigned to you?" Huang Xiaoya curled her lips. These two fellows have lived a good life for too long. They're greedy for life, afraid of death, and picky. Young Li was very dissatisfied. "Xiaoya, you have to speak with your conscience. We didn't lose face for Xian Yuan in the last battle. We just had some ideas. How did it become greedy for life and afraid of death?" The few of them spoke very casually together, and Smoky Horse couldn't say it out loud. In fact, she assigned this task to the two of them with some selfish motives. Go out and gather the cultivators from the other regions of the left periphery, and stay there to be responsible for communicating with Xuan Yuan's main forces. This kind of task wasn't very risky. The cultivators of the left periphery had limited strength, and they didn't have the fighting spirit of the swordsman. Therefore, they could fight if they could win, and run if they couldn't. There was a high chance of survival. Moreover, they might not be able to make it in time for the big battle. This was the best arrangement for these two friends who weren't strong enough. It wouldn't hurt their self-esteem, and it also gave them the best chance of survival. If they followed the swordsman's main forces, then it would be a true matter of life and death. If they weren't strong enough, then they would almost certainly become the target of others. The swordsman's main forces were the main forces of the final battle. There was no question of whether they would fight or not. The only question was how to fight. With Xuan Yuan's fighting style, there was no reason to retreat under a group attack. With their strength, they would be the first to be eliminated. There was no luck to speak of. This was the only thing she could do for them. She didn't expect these two fellows to be so ungrateful. Chapter 1811. Icy Guest Sword laughed dryly. Their main reason was that they did not want to leave the main force when the war was approaching. Did they feel that it would be safer if they followed the big guys? Of course, they cannot say that. They had to find a reasonable reason. Icy Guest Sword was very good at this. "Senior sister, Young Li, and I have some words from the bottom of our hearts. I don't know if we should say it." Smoky looked at the two of them in amusement. Compared to her previous iron-blooded companions, Wu Shixing, Chong Lu, and Chong Xian, these two people could not be compared at all. But after reincarnating for so many years, she understood a principle. One should not easily define a cultivator of a generation. The era was different. The characters of cultivators were different. After 2000, after 2000, after 2000, after 2000, the cultivators of every era had their own uniqueness. You could not like them, but you could not look down on them. The era had changed. The environment had also changed. The thoughts of cultivators were also changing. Just like the cultivators now, they were more focused on personal enjoyment, more self-centered, and more independent. However, they did not endure humiliation and cut through thorns like they did in her era. Which was better? No one knew. But since this era had created this group of people who did not seem to be in the right place, they naturally had their reasons. They had all kinds of shortcomings and were far from the standards of the ancient swordsmen. But when facing a strong enemy, they might not be worse than their seniors. Say it. In Xinyuan Sword Sect, everyone has the right to speak. As long as what you say is reasonable, I will not be stubborn just because of my face. I see Guest's sword might be lazy, but his brain was good. He opened his mouth and spoke nonsense. Senior sister, let's talk about the matter. In terms of direction, senior sister has not been in Zhuozhou for a long time. Perhaps you do not understand the recent situation in Zhuozhou. The big and small intestine blind path is the place that has the most intense reaction to the changes in the universe. It can be said that all the changes are concentrated in the blind path. In addition, when we were dealing with the Buddhists, those fellows did not care about anything and threw out forbidden artifacts. This also accelerated the change to a large extent. So now, the big and small intestine blind path is no longer the same as before. The blind path is blocked at times, just like young Li's brain. Even if they could pass through, danger lurked everywhere. It was not suitable for a large group of cultivators to pass through. Unless we have no other choice, we won't take that route. If the enemy comes here, the blind route won't be a good route for them to march on. This is true for the enemy, but it's the same for us as well. It's extremely inconvenient for reinforcements to pass through. Once we receive the warning, we can't send it out, and we can't rush over either. Once we seal off the road, it'll take years, and it'll be too late. Smokey frowned. She hadn't returned for hundreds of years, so she didn't know much about this situation. Li Shishir also added fuel to the fire. The few domains outside the blind path are also the weakest in the left zhou. Most of them have gone to the 5th ring, so there's basically no one left behind. For example, Xi and Guanxing of the Weijian Mountain and Lan Hai of the Firmament Sword Sect are all gone. Senior sister knows this. Personally, I think that with their current strength, they can barely protect their domain. Sending a message or something like that, forcing them to organize their forces to participate in the battle is a bit too much. Senior apprentice sister meant that the mobile forces were mainly monarchs. How many monarchs did they have? They could only form a Yuanying team, and it's useless. That's why the two of us feel that there's no need to organize outside the blind path. It's enough to send a message now. It's not because we're afraid that we don't want to travel far. Smokey looked at them quietly. This wasn't enough. Ice Guest Sword knew that this big sister was difficult to deal with. Her temper could block the wind and rain for them without reservation, but she couldn't tolerate a grain of sand in her eyes. We feel that it's good to place the main force in the blind path. No matter where the enemy comes from, we can react faster, especially in the negative space. Big sister, do you still remember the land of exile? Lu Shi went to Zhou Xian through the space crack from there. Then will the people of Hung River barge in through this passage? After all, if they go through here, they can avoid the search of the entire left Zhou Xian and perfectly avoid the heaven and earth membrane. If they suddenly appear in the domain, we'll have to be cautious, but they can do whatever they want. Smokey was a little moved. The previous reason was very far-fetched. No matter what the situation outside the blind path was, they should send someone to organize and notify them, just in case. However, regarding the land of exile, this was indeed something that she had not considered. Because she was familiar with the history of Xianyuan, she knew very well that there was once, 20,000 years ago, when Zer tried to enter the blue sky through the land of exile. In the end, he was stopped by the Crow ancestor. It wasn't that Shueshan didn't consider this at all, but it was limited to closing the passage of the vertical eye. However, it seemed that this measure wasn't enough. After thinking for a while, she said, "Your suggestion about the land of exile is very valuable. How about this? I see that you don't want to go to the blind path, so you can go to the land of exile and be responsible for the search and defense of the land of exile. Are you willing? Bing Ku and Li Shishir looked at each other. They knew that they couldn't refuse anymore. They actually wanted to be with the team, but Big Sister always wanted to push them in the direction of being alone. They understood the difference, but they didn't want to be special. Even if they were weaker, the swordsmen had a backbone. They didn't want to increase their chances of survival in this way. Seeing the two of them slowly walk out, Huang Xiaoya curled her lips. These two guys, don't they know that Big Sister Smokey is taking care of them? You look like you're not willing to. Smokey smiled. They know, but they still want to puff themselves up at their own cost. No matter what the reason is, if they are willing to stay with us, then they are qualified Xianyuan swordsmen. We shouldn't ask for too much. Huang Xiaoya thought for a while. Big Sister Smokey, why are you so sure that the Hengi people will attack Qin Kong, but you agree that only Xianyuan will go back to defend? As long as one more sect comes, not to mention the 3 pure ones, even if Tai comes, the pressure on us will be reduced a lot. Smokey sighed. Xiaoya, you have to know that the 5th ring sects will also be attacked. What I can't be sure of is the power distribution of the Hengi people. Which direction would it lean more towards? The key problem is that the 5th ring is a planet of immigrants. Its origins are complicated. It's not only from Zhuozhou, but also from many other galaxies. You can't treat your home planet as your home planet and let everyone treat it as their home planet. In the 5th ring, our Xianyuan is the most special one. Because of many reasons, others see us differently from the other 5th ring sects. Our sword vein caused a huge change in the universe. No matter the real cause, that's how others see it. So, we need to take on more responsibility. This is something that can't be avoided. Huang Xiaoya nodded. Yes, they were all 5th ring sects, but Xianyuan sword sect was the most unique among them. Chapter 1812. In the Beast territory, the Annihilation Alliance held their first joint conference. Since they were all here, there was no question of whether to fight or not, but how to fight and how to govern Hung River after the war. 2 or 3 sun gods came from each realm and gathered in the Beast territory to solve the problem of coordination before the attack. They were still not sure how many realms Hung River Realm knew were participating, so they chose to gather their troops when the Great Path collapsed. It was also a good strategy to cooperate with the demons from the interior world. Roughly speaking, 40 sun gods came from the Buddhist sect of the 5th ring Zhou Xian Heaven's Choice world, 30 each from the floating anchor chain and 30 from the light and light realms. With the addition of the Beast territory and ancient beasts, there were easily more than 300 sun gods, and this did not include the half-immortals from the interior world. Such formidable strength was already sufficient to form a crushing momentum against Hung He. The Sun God Grand Ritual of Hung River Realm strength was around 100. Even if they pulled in other reinforcements, it was impossible to compare to the Allied forces. Breaking through the great membrane of heaven and earth and the long scroll of Eternal River would be the time of Hung River Orthodoxy's destruction. This joint conference was mainly to reach an agreement on strategy, and the focus was on how to cooperate between different groups to achieve the effect of multiple reinforcements when one side was in danger. As for the tactical level, no one would discuss it. For example, how to break through the great membrane and the sacred river, these specific things could not be discussed. After all, they were cultivators who valued personal strength, not screws. They were all sun gods, who was qualified to teach them how to fight, how to cooperate. Lu Xiaoyi was the only essence soul cultivator present, but no one dared to underestimate him. In the East Heaven main world, he had become a taboo existence. He was the convener of this alliance, and could also be the leader. But to everyone's surprise, whether it was Lu Xiaoyi himself or the 5th ring, he did not reveal even the slightest intention of being the alliance leader. This surprised everyone, and they also heaved a sigh of relief. If they were to forcefully elect an alliance leader, this fragile alliance could very well be torn apart. Could it be that before attacking Hung River, they would have to compete in the hegemony alliance again. He didn't even open his mouth to speak. He just sat there with a smile on his face like a smiling tiger, which made people feel even more uneasy. At the end of the exchange, Zhu Ming of the Eastern Heaven Buddhist sect cast his gaze over. Lu, why don't you say a few words? If you don't open your mouth, our so-called discussion is meaningless. Originally, I thought that in such a big alliance, there had to be someone to take the position. If you, Lu Jun, don't take the lead, I don't think anyone else will either. There was a trap in his words. On the surface, he was pushing him to be the leader, but if he really believed it, there would be countless troubles in the future. Everyone here was an old monster that was 4,000 to 5,000 years old. How could a little demon that was not even 2,000 years old be so arrogant? Of course, Lu Xiaoyi wouldn't fall for this trick. Big Dafa. This kid's experience is shallow, and he's not qualified to take on such a heavy responsibility. He could run errands and run errands, but he didn't dare to show his cowardice in front of so many people. Grandmaster Jueming is a senior expert. Last time we met, it was thanks to the guide you sent to lead the way for me. Unfortunately, Grandmaster Jueming was unfortunately killed by a strong magnetic field. I am truly uneasy and would like to ask for your forgiveness. Jueming's expression didn't change in the slightest. Cultivators of my generation walk the void and die from celestial phenomena. This is a very normal thing. What crime did Lu Jun commit? Not to mention the two of you, even I came to the beast territory this time, crossing realms and regions along the way, and I also suffered many hardships. There was even a Sanku Duda who died on the way. This was also his final destination. There's no need to mind. The alliance between Eastern Heaven's Buddhist and Taoist sects was a passive action. This cooperation didn't mean that they were on the same side and reconciled. The cultivation world wasn't so childish. Under the premise of encircling and suppressing Hung River, it was normal to obstruct each other. Propriety was how to do it flawlessly, and how to make things difficult for the other party without affecting everyone's overall interests. Lu Xiaoyi already said, I've already dealt with that Sanku of yours. Jueming's reply was straightforward. It didn't matter. One Sanku was nothing. We also helped you get rid of his accomplice, the three distresses. Are you satisfied? It was a very straightforward way of saying that we would never stop killing you. But if you saw through it, we didn't mind adding something to appease your anger. In short, the Buddhist sects may target you, but there won't be any problems when it comes to exterminating Hung River Realm. This was a cultivation question and answer. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Since Great Master Jueming asked me to say a few words, I'll be bold and say a few words from the bottom of my heart. This isn't just my idea. It's also the common thought of some friends in the upper realm. With one sentence, he pulled those demons of the interior realm to his side. They were the future seeds of the various realms here, the hope of surviving the change of the era. By saying this, he was actually placing himself in a higher and more important position. These people had no choice but to listen to him. What should I do? Everyone here is my teacher. I don't need to teach you. Everyone came here to offer a generous gift for the heavenly law's renewal. If we don't offer the gift because of some private matters, we'll lose face. Then we won't be the only ones who will lose face. This is the eastern sky's gift, and the northwest sky and southern sky are watching. If we lose face again, then if there are similar actions in the universe's cultivation world in the future, I'm afraid we can only listen to others. What qualifications do we have to stir up trouble? Let's not talk about anything else. I only have one sentence. As long as we each do our best, a mere Hung River realm won't be our obstacle. If we fall into a passive situation, don't look outside for reasons. Just think about whether you've done your best. It goes without saying. Lu Xiaoyi's words were very straightforward. This was an image project. Everyone came to show their faces, not to show their buttocks. Dilute the barriers between each other, think more about the common interests of everyone, and strive to establish the image of the eastern sky. At that time, they would have a greater right to speak among the four divisions of the universe. There was no need to talk about the details. They were all old people who had lived for thousands of years. What couldn't they see through? Everyone should first establish the prestige of the eastern sky, and then see how to divide the benefits internally. This was the way of a trend. Before everyone dispersed, they could see the distance between each other's relationships. Broken silkworm and a sun spirit from floating sinking came over to exchange greetings, expressing their support to a certain extent. It seemed that Glorious Light and the others had put a lot of effort into the anchor chain these years. The fifth ring's lobbying and roping and floating sinking had also achieved a certain effect. This was a good start. Of course, the ones who stayed in the end were the old ones, White Eyebrows, Daoist Pang, Black Dragonhead, Kong Shi, and the others. They could be considered the fifth ring's relatively staunch allies. Lu Xiaoyi didn't hide anything from them. He told them about Hung River's possible actions, as well as the fifth ring's response. These people weren't surprised, because no one thought that Hung River would be captured without a fight. They would definitely struggle in the face of death, and their struggle would only lead to the fifth ring. At their level, it was already impossible for an accident that no one could think of to happen. This was the true face of the universe's war. Chapter 1813. Daoist Pang shook his head regretfully. Unfortunately, time is too tight. A mere 100 years isn't enough to transfer some people over from Heaven's choice. White Brow also said, actually, you don't have to send so many sun spirits. It's too far away, and it's inconvenient to move them back and forth. If you had told us earlier, we could have gathered some sun spirits for you. It's better to leave the main force in this realm. Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. It wasn't that no one had mentioned this when they were at the fifth ring, but even more people opposed it. It involved the pride of the fifth ring and a lot of psychological things, so it couldn't be considered completely from a tactical point of view. They were all on the same side, so some problems could be discussed more clearly, including some tactical problems after the war began. White Brow shook his head. Hung River is too quiet. It's so quiet that it makes people feel uneasy. It's so quiet that I don't know where their confidence comes from. If they had pulled us out to compete with them in the void, even if we were at a disadvantage, we would at least have some clues. How could it be like this? White Brow's words were actually what most people were thinking. Black Dragon hit the nail on the head. To be honest, I just don't know where their reinforcements are coming from. Although we haven't entered the inner space of Hung River Realm in all these years, our surveillance in the outer space has never stopped. It's really strange that we haven't found the source at all. There is a limit to tactics, and they had to conform to the principles of the art of war. But there was no limit to foreign aid. There was no way to figure it out. This was the most difficult direction, and there was no way to guess it. Lu Xiaoyi reminded them, the people of Hengi are very good at spatial manipulation, especially in extra-dimensional spaces. Everyone has to pay attention to this point. They've been preparing for this for more than 100 years. Qin Yangzi smiled. No matter. Who doesn't know how to use space? There are countless ways to restrict space. If we really fight, no one will be able to use space. Hung River Realm's space techniques aren't pure. You don't have to worry about that. This was the confidence of orthodox Taoism, which came from being the master of the universe's cultivation world for millions of years. This was also the confidence of most of the cultivators present. Although no one said it out loud, no one thought that this was going to be a complicated war. These young spirits who had come from afar were all experts who were good at fighting. If they didn't have considerable strength, they wouldn't have been sent because they would stand on the big stage of the eastern sky and be scrutinized by others. An individual's forbidden arts, secret arts, and consummate skills were the basics. What's more, one's own art of truth came from different sects in different realms. Thus, they were confident that they would win. Taoist Pang asked with a smile, where is Lord Lu going? Should he stay here and organize the Battle of Hung River, or return to the fifth ring to deal with a possible attack from Hung River? Lu Xiaoyi said honestly, to be fair, I should go back to fifth ring, because the possibility of something happening there was far greater than here. But the problem is that, as the one who called for this big operation, if I wasn't present when the war was about to start, I was afraid that I would leave something for others to talk about. We won't say anything. After all, no matter where we fight, the goal is the same. But what about the others? The floating of the anchor chain shows a tendency to draw closer, and the light of Buddhism only wishes for the world to be in chaos. In this kind of complicated situation, I'm afraid I won't be able to escape. Let's see how it goes. If everything goes smoothly, we'll find a chance to return to fifth ring. He actually didn't say one more thing, which was that he was afraid that after those freaks of interior tier came down, Qing Xian alone wouldn't be able to control the situation. These people could still restrain themselves slightly in the interior heaven because there were a great many second severance great cultivators there. But once they returned to the main world, with their arrogance and natural disposition, how could they possibly command as one as an army? It was impossible for them to bring disaster to the mortal world. But in the main world's cultivation world, it was almost inevitable that they would cause some trouble. Although no one would say the various chains of disdain in the cultivation world, they really did exist. Among them, the most fatal circle was between the main world's young spirits and these so-called freaks. One was proud and arrogant, and had an unlimited future. The other was depressed, and had a solid present. It was inevitable that they didn't see eye to eye with each other. Even if he was the convener, moving between these realms, he could faintly feel this kind of atmosphere. There were many young spirits who wanted to weigh his weight. If it weren't for his good interpersonal skills, his ability to speak and act, and his constant restraint due to the lack of time, and his relationship with these realms, he would probably have reached out to compete with them long ago. It was easy to deal with one person, but if a group of people came down, disputes would be everywhere. So how could it be easily controlled? He stayed in the beast territory and didn't go to the negative space to meet up with fifth ring Zhou Xian's natural choice group. There was no need. Before leaving, he had a last secret talk with Guandu and Qing Yangzi. Qing Yangzi looked at him. How do you feel? I see that you don't seem optimistic. This old Taoist was really good at reading people, so Lu Xiaoyi didn't have anything to hide. I don't know why, either, but from the day I started planning, I was truly complacent. As the plan progressed, normally, this kind of self-confidence became weaker and weaker. It shouldn't be like this. I successfully pulled over all the realms in the plan. No matter what the method was, the goal was achieved. In terms of strength, it can no longer be described as crushing. It should be plowing the courtyard and sweeping the acupoints. But I don't feel like this. It's not that I feel like I will fail, but that it will be very difficult. But I can't figure out where this difficulty comes from. The three of them were silent. The universe was too big, and there were too many secrets. It wasn't something that cultivators could know. Even if they had reached the peak of cultivation in the main world, the more they knew, the more they didn't know. Guandu snorted. Realms, races, nothing more. Why think so much? If you thought too much 100 years ago, would you have started this world-ending war? Hung River. You must teach them a lesson that will never be extinguished. Establish an alliance so that the fifth ring won't be hated by everyone. What you did in Dafa was right, but the rest can only be done with the sword. Difficulties can't be solved by thinking. Lu Xiaoyi nodded guiltily. He still had a lot to learn from these old cultivators. His advantage was that he still had time, but these old cultivators didn't have time to get close to the young people. Qing Yangzi sighed. Don't blame them. After all, he and Qing Xian are still young. The two of them started the trouble, and the responsibility on their shoulders is too great. At our age, we haven't stirred up such a big storm in more than 4,000 years. Compared to them, we are too far away. Little you and Qing Xian are only worried about the fifth ring. But as someone who has been there before, I want to tell you that you must believe in your fifth ring companions. Believe that they can deal with the crisis alone. Don't have the thought of returning to the fifth ring after everything goes smoothly here. Just stay here. Your mission is to break open the Hung River realm. After dealing with the Hung River, what's the point of some mishaps in the fifth ring? Every one of us has our own responsibilities. You have already done what you should do very well. You must give others a chance to perform. We can't rely on one person to survive. Even Li Wuya from 20,000 years ago couldn't do this. Chapter 1814. When Lu Xiaoyi had the time, he would chat with the Black Dragon all day long. When he had completely abandoned his past burdens, the Black Dragon became closer to him instead. Senior brother is a man of his word. I feel too much pressure when I'm with him. To be honest, I don't want to be with him. Because consciously or unconsciously, all the light belongs to him. Black Dragon explained its relationship with Crow Ancestor in this way. This was very normal. Every cultivator with dreams and self-awareness would think this way. If it only wanted to be a follower, it would not be able to reach this step. You've seen a wild boar? Everyone has their own way of living. Now that it has fulfilled its wish, it has something to look forward to. I've never looked for it because I don't want to affect it. Its abilities are too rough and it's not suitable to join us. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Listening to Black Dragon's story, his mood slowly calmed down. Regarding reincarnation, in the cultivation world, there had never been a fixed procedure. Changes were everywhere, and abnormalities would always appear when you least expect it. Those so-called reincarnation laws were only suitable for the majority of people. However, there were many special cases. The heavenly Tao bestowed countless opportunities, and he was just one of them. Our ancient race doesn't have reincarnation, but after living for a long time, we've heard more. The higher the realm, the more variables there are in reincarnation. In Yuanying and Perfected Monarch, the reincarnation laws in the cultivation world are basically not bad. But if you take a step forward, the reincarnation laws will become disorderly. There's no conclusion, and it's determined by the person. Lu Xiaoyi listened quietly. He really needed the knowledge of these ancient creatures so that he could understand the essence of this universe better. Whether immortals can reincarnate or not, this is a mystery that no one knows. Some say yes, because of the immortal's legacy in the previous life. There are immortal roots, immortal meridians. Some say no, because the reincarnation Tao stops at the immortal level. When the past, present, and future become one, there's no past. Then what's the point of reincarnation? There are different opinions, and each has their own reasons. You can't listen to these words. The more you listen, the more confused you get. Black Dragon laughed. Luckily, I'm a dragon and don't have to consider the troubles of you humans. Otherwise, I'm afraid I'll be more trouble than you. It takes a lot of courage for you to be able to cut off the past, regardless of whether it's right or wrong. At the very least, you have your own sense of self. This is very important. I don't know how you did it, but it's the first time I've heard that a human cultivator could break with his past. Therefore, it's another mystery how the great Tao of reincarnation works on you. Except for you, no one can figure it out. Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. Actually, it's not completely severed. I think that since it's a fact, I can't deliberately erase it. I just don't want to rely on it. He didn't want to live like it. However, the reason why I was able to reach this point in my cultivation journey is because of the help of this past. This was also the truth. I couldn't just turn around and deny it after receiving benefits, right? Acknowledge it and walk your own path. That's what I'm thinking. I just don't know if I can continue like this in the future. Black Dragon looked at him. You can do it. But even if you do, you may never be able to awaken those memories. The secret's hidden in history. Aren't you curious? Lu Xiaoyi sneered. I'm curious, but there are actually two ways to know these secrets. One is to inherit the memories, which is very easy. The other is to unearth them yourself, which is very challenging. I like challenging goals. Reincarnation, within a certain realm, had a pattern. But beyond this range, it would become blurry. Now, it seemed that this range was between nascent soul and true monarch. The lower one was mortal, and the higher one was immortal. The so-called pattern of reincarnation was a joke. It didn't seem difficult to understand. What the Black Dragon meant was that after becoming a half-immortal, the rules of reincarnation would change, and it would be easier to be influenced by various reasons. If he consciously banished a certain memory, then it was very likely that he would still inherit some karma from his previous life, but he would not be able to get help from the past. For the sake of independence, for the sake of oneself, was such a choice wise enough? The path would be more rugged and uneven as one went up. One path would be more difficult, while the other path would at least allow him to borrow some strength. Different people had different pursuits. His opponents wouldn't lessen the pressure on him just because he chose an ordinary young master from Lu province. Was it worth it? Lu Xiaoyi didn't know. He only knew that by making such a choice, he had at least avoided a big trap. The change of the era, the chaos of the universe, the confusion of the past, and the great challenges of the future, the pressure of the sect, his own cultivation. When all these were mixed together, the road to the upper realm that seemed clear became even more difficult and dangerous. It was nothing. Compared to what he wanted to do in the future, these were nothing. Black Dragon revealed a rare, melancholy expression. Actually, every living creature in the cultivation world is confused now. Not only you, not only humans. After all, no one knows what the change of the era is like. So what if they are immortals? They might be even more restless than you and me. What is the right thing to do? Or to do nothing? Or to fight? Or not to fight? Until the end, who can say for sure? You human monsters are fighting for the 36 innate great Taos. But what makes you think that the new universe must have these 36 innate great Taos? Can't new great Taos appear? Can it be 48 or 24 innate great Taos? Fighting for nothing with the characteristics of the heavenly Tao, it might not be impossible. Lu Xiaoyi felt the same way. He realized that although Old Black was a dragon, the kind that was full of brute force, looking at the problem from the perspective of an ancient beast was also very deep. So let's do as we please. Since the future is uncertain, why should we fix our thinking? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Be your true self. At least you won't feel aggrieved. His days in the beast territory became casual. Lu Xiaoyi no longer thought about the 5 rings, about the reinforcements from the Hengyi realm. He was very sure that he had to start a war against the Hengyi realm. If he didn't, he wouldn't be able to have a clear mind. For many things, those who died in the War of the 5 Rings, and also for a white poplar, he waited quietly. Slowly, more and more young god beasts gathered in the beast territory. Slowly, his intuition that the great Tao was about to collapse became stronger and stronger. Everything became clear. The restless aura floated in the void, while the Hengyi realm was still so calm, forming a sharp contrast. This was a great era. There were big events and good opponents. What was there to be dissatisfied with? P.S. I recommend a book, No Regrets in This Life, written by my book friend Steven. It's very good. The new book is difficult. Everyone, help me and make the numbers look better. Chapter 1815. Ice Guest Sword and Li Shanyan once again came to the familiar land of exile. They could not even remember how many times they had come here. They remembered that when they had just become yuanying, they were curious about the negative space. So they often came here to appreciate the different sky. This was the first time they had come here after becoming supreme, because there was no longer any novelty. The land of exile was still the same. Even the friends they used to know were mostly taken away by time, making them feel like they were just passers-by, without the slightest feeling of revisiting an old place. I hate this feeling. When the realm is high, people feel more lonely. It's better to be on a warm beach with people coming and going around. Ice Guest Sword was very emotional. Li Shanyan snorted. That's why I said you are useless. You will only be like this for the rest of your life. How many people want to be lonely but can't get it? But you are pretending here. Their mission was to ensure that the land of exile would not become a springboard for the enemy to attack Shao Mountain. Actually, this mission was not difficult, because the passage was controlled by Xin Yuan. No matter who entered or left, they would go through a strict qualification check. Shao Mountain would automatically close if there was any movement, to prevent people from fishing in troubled waters. It was actually very safe, but Big Sister wanted to be safer, so the two of them were sent here, far away from the main group. Ice Guest's sword was very depressed. Do I look tired of fighting? Is it that obvious? Big Sister keeps pushing us to a safe place. They also want a safe face. Li Shanyan mercilessly exposed him. It's not obvious. It's not obvious that you are tired of fighting. It's obvious that you are very afraid of death. You are just short of writing the words "go out and kill me" on top of your head. Do you need face? You never have? Okay. Xuan Yuan's biggest mistake was to waste resources on a piece of trash like you. It would be better to use these resources to raise a demon beast. At least when the enemy comes, it can show its teeth. The only thing I agree with is that Big Sister is really wrong this time. She will never understand that as long as there is a place like you, it will definitely not be safe, and there will only be a slim chance of survival. What sins did I commit in my previous life that I can't get rid of a scourge like you even after cultivating for my whole life? They had been stumbling for thousands of years. This was already their daily routine. It was hard to imagine that there would be a day when no one would stumble. How would the remaining people persevere? These vicious trash talk had become the motivation for them to continue living. They just didn't know it. After Li Shishir finished his rant, he felt a little better. Considering that you've always been a jinx, something bad will definitely happen in this trip to the exile. I have to gather all the sects here and send them out. I can't slack off in the slightest. I've always wanted to prove my worth in a certain war, and this might be my chance. Ice Guest Sword's face had been scolded by his companions for thousands of years. He was very serious. Young man, don't always say that I'm unlucky. All these years, I've been thinking about a problem. Did I bring all this trouble and danger to you? Or was this your hidden attribute? When I was alone, there weren't so many unforeseen events. Why is it that when I'm with you, it's as if I'm going to reincarnate at any time? I may have acted like a coward, but at least I was honest. Unlike you, you're obviously scared, but you pretend you're not and push me to the front. Value? What value do you have? From a young man to a middle-aged man, and now you're old. Don't bully me because you're poor. You're poor because you were born poor. You didn't accumulate good karma in your previous life. It's all up to the heavens. With your character, do you think the heavens will waste time looking at you? The two of them found comfort in their quarrel. They seriously gathered the few large forces and the scattered small sects in the land of exile. Heaven-defying sect, Gu Alliance, Blood River sect. They arranged their levels, and with the land of exile as the center, they would patrol the space within a 1-month radius all day without any difference. They also set up a reliable communication system and did not let go of any clues. A month's distance was a little short, but there was no other way. Because there were only a few true monarchs in the exile, there were many Yuanying, but they couldn't go too far. With their abilities, it was very difficult for them to face the anti-space void beasts. There was a huge difference in strength between them and the orthodoxies of the main world. It was just an early warning. They didn't expect them to face the enemy. After everything was arranged, they stayed in the exile. This was not because they were lazy, but because the two of them were not very useful in patrolling the universe. It was better to stay in the exile and be responsible for gathering information. If there were any abnormalities, they would have to verify it personally. The two of them wandered in the sky above the exile. Youngli had been with this guy for a long time and had developed an excellent habit, which was to not be at ease. He was so paranoid that he couldn't control himself. I still don't think it's safe. If they find something in the outer space, can the two of us confirm it? Maybe it's just meat buns. Also, if the news reaches here, how can it be quickly sent back to Shao Mountain? It takes time to pass through the passage. If someone blocks us, we may not be able to go back. Ice Guest's sword was speechless. This guy was getting more and more cowardly. There's no other way. How can two hairy people like us control a realm and the surrounding space? If a Yang spirit cultivator really breaks in, I don't think the two of us will be of much use. Life and death are small matters, but Shao Mountain is more important. I feel that it's not reliable to use normal methods to deal with possible attacks. Think about it. If a strong enemy really attacks, the ones leading will definitely be those Yang spirits. What's the use of us patrolling the network outside? Not to mention them. Even the two of us will be useless. Youngly nodded, which was rare. You're finally saying something reasonable. Now, let's think about it carefully. Can we find a clever way to safely and securely spread the news? Ice Guest Sword asked, should we be safe first, or should we spread the news first? Youngly gritted his teeth. Before he could speak, Ice Guest Sword interrupted him. I understand. My life is in my own hands, not the heavens. I feel that your two catchphrases are not enough. You should add one more. After 100 years, you'll be a coward again. The two of them wandered aimlessly in the air, thinking hard. Unknowingly, a year later, they subconsciously arrived in front of the spatial rift. This was the place where Master Lu had left. It had a special meaning to them. Thus, they admired the strange appearance of the rift while talking nonsense. Young Li sighed with emotion. Master Lu is really bold. He dared to barge into such a spatial rift alone and even made it out alive. Ice Guest Sword looked at him as if he was ignorant. Master Lu is not bold, but he has a sense of responsibility. He has a purpose. If it wasn't to investigate the spies in the land of exile, he wouldn't have put himself in danger so easily. Youngly was shocked. Spies? There's such a thing in the land of exile? As the two of them spoke, their expressions began to change drastically. They suddenly realized that they seemed to have found a huge secret. Chapter 1816. Ice Guest Sword repeated the reasons that Lu Xiaoyi occasionally told him. That was after Lu Xiaoyi came back from Zhouxian. But now that the two of them were talking about it again, they vaguely found something different. Ice Guest Sword lowered his voice and said mysteriously, the last time Master Lu came back, he chatted with me. Although he didn't mention much, he did mention the places that he suspected: Zhouxian, Buddhism, Yangding. However, in hindsight, Zhouxian had already become one of us. In the previous war, the Buddhists did not use this channel at all. Yangding had also forsaken the darkness for the light. Hence, I thought that Master Lu was probably scaring himself and thinking too much. In the end, he went to Zhouxian and caused countless troubles. But now, a hidden enemy, the Hengi region, has appeared. Then, could they be the mastermind behind the arrangements in the land of exile for 2,000 years? Young Li's voice trembled, and he was a little excited. You are finally enlightened. It's very possible. Then there are two places, the land of exile and the grassland. We are very clear about the situation in the grassland. There aren't many perfected monarchs, and there are many Yuanying. It's impossible to fight against Xianyuan head-on. But what if they took advantage of the fact that everyone in Shao Mountain went to the outer space to prepare for battle and then did something at the old end peak? It's the same in the land of exile. No one knows who has fallen into their trap. Is it an enemy hidden in the land of exile? They don't need many people. They just need to control the wormhole before the enemy invades in large numbers. One of the two will merge and open a passage for the enemy to enter Shao Mountain. The more the two cobblers thought about it, the more likely it was. They were going to make a great contribution. They rushed to the heaven-defying sect quickly. They had to inform Big Sister of their discovery and block this big hole as soon as possible. They were very clear that there was nothing wrong with wanting to make a contribution, but it had to be within the scope of their own abilities. They wanted to rely on the two of them to guard the wormhole and then warn Shao Mountain. This was greed, although that was the most practical way to make a contribution. But the two of them had no confidence in their ability to guard the wormhole. Spread the news. Even if it was just a guess, even if it turned out to be a false alarm in the end, it would still be much safer for Shao Mountain than waiting here and waiting until they saw some clues before taking action. To be able to render meritorious service without suffering any serious injuries was, of course, for the best. They had wandered around the land of exile for 2 years. Countless painstaking arrangements had not been of any use. Unexpectedly, the trip to the space crack had given them a new idea. We have to hurry. Big Sister said that the Hengi realm should take action when the Great Path Shard disintegrates, but that might not be the case here. It won't be wrong, but it might be ahead of time. So, we don't have much time left. Young Lee's mind was very clear. Ice Guest's sword was very meticulous. Which one of us should go back and show our faces? There's no need for two people to go together to deliver the message. One person has to stay behind to guard the wormhole. I'm your brother. I'm older than you. Of course I'll go back. Iceman's sword did not back down. You can't speak clearly. You speak incoherently. Why don't I go? The two of them fought for merit along the way, laughing and joking. In fact, they were in a very good mood because they would soon be able to join the main force. Even if they knew that their strength was not enough, even if they would become the two tremblers of Shao Mountain as soon as they entered the sword formation, they still hoped that they could be with everyone when Xian Yuan was in trouble. This was a feeling that they could not give up. Although they were anxious, once they entered the heaven-defying sect, they did not show any anxiety on their faces. This was at least the shrewdness they had, because in the heaven-defying sect, in the land of exile, they were not sure who they should believe. 2,000 years had passed. Who could say for sure who could be controlled? Who could be innocent? There was no time to screen. There was only one problem now, which was to report the news, and then everything would be fine. In the future, they could enjoy the sunshine in the Thousand Islands region openly. They came to the wormhole leisurely. Along the way, they met some heaven-defying cultivators. Those who were familiar with them laughed and asked them why they were going back. The two of them used the excuse that they did not have enough spiritual opportunity and went back to the sect to get their annual allowance. With their status, no one dared to doubt them. Although the situation in Shao Mountain was very tense, and although the task of patrolling the land of exile was not easy, everyone knew that this was just a precautionary measure. In fact, the possibility of entering Qing Kong through the passage was very small, because the two ends of the wormhole, the main control end was on the side of Shao Mountain. It could be closed at any time. Maybe a few people could sneak in, but it would be a dream to sneak in an entire army. Did they think that the swordsmen were made of wood? When they arrived at the wormhole, a swordsman Yuan came out to greet them respectfully. Usually, there were two swordsmen Jin Dan guarding this place. However, in an emergency, two Yuan were added. But they were not from Shao Mountain. They were branches of the Shao Mountain swordsman family in the land of exile. They were born and raised in the land of exile. In order to gather forces, the real Xianyuan swordsmen gathered outside Qing Kong. Of course, they could only arrange for these branches to share the pressure. Otherwise, just these kinds of guarding tasks alone would waste a lot of precious manpower. This was not Xuanyuan style. Usually, they would not doubt these people. However, at this time, they could not trust them. This was the most basic principle of doing things. Li Shengyin said, "Prepare to open the wormhole." The Yuan was a little embarrassed. "Uncle Li, the wormhole is being cleared up. If you want to go, you'll have to wait for another half a month." Li Shengyin slapped his forehead and looked at the Iceman's sword. He sighed inwardly. How could he forget about this? This wormhole was formed too long ago. It was tens of thousands of years old. 20,000 years ago, the Crow ancestor coincidentally came to the land of exile and reopened it. It was close to 20,000 years ago. Originally, although the wormhole was old, the space passage was still stable. Entering and exiting was normal, and there were no accidents. However, after the collapse of the Great Tao accelerated more than 1,000 years ago, some special astronomical phenomena occurred. The unstable space passage often became the first to respond to the changes in the universe, including this wormhole passage that connected Qing Kong, E Mountain, and the land of exile. It began to block from time to time, just like the blood vessels of human beings with blood lipids. Until now, every few years, there would be 1 or 2 months where they could not communicate with each other. After this happened, there were some bold cultivators who took the risk and tried to pass through. In the end, everyone realized that the passage was not completely impossible to pass through. Instead, there was a certain probability, probably no more than 30%. Moreover, passing through under such circumstances would easily cause harm to the cultivators. Therefore, no one took the risk after that. Everyone knew about this situation. They could not blame the higher-ups of Xianyuan for being careless. They believed that as long as they could control the side of Qin Kong E Mountain, no one would be able to pass through this passage. How could there be such a coincidence that when the passage was blocked, there would be enemies coming in? Chapter 1817. The two of them seemed to be vexed, but in fact, they were having an intense argument with each other. I just have a bad feeling about this. The more difficult it is, the more evil things will happen. The more evil things happen, the more difficult it is. I see everyone as a bad person now, so we can't wait. After working with you for so many years, I have understood one thing. If you think of the worst, then you are definitely right. Li Shishir was still habitually pessimistic. Ice Guest Sword was still carefree as usual. You shouldn't have come to this world. If you die, you won't have any worries. To cultivate to your level, you're also a weirdo. But I also agree to go over immediately. How about this? You stay here to block the enemy's army. I will escape first. Li Shishir rejected without hesitation, just like every decision they made in the thousands of years they knew each other. Opposing each other was a part of their lives. Scammer, there is one thing you need to understand. To an army of cultivators, no cultivator can stop them with his own strength. The last time it was Crow Ancestor who did so, he was also delayed and could not completely block them. Now, even if you put Lu Shur here, he would also not choose to foolishly guard the wormhole. So, there's actually no practical meaning in staying here. In order to ensure that the news can be sent back safely, the two of us have to return. Ice Guest Sword shook his head when he heard that. No way. If one person goes through the wormhole, there's still a small chance of returning alive. If the two of us go in together, according to the rules of history, the danger will multiply. I am a jinx, you are a magnifier. Even a flat road can cause an accident, not to mention a dangerous road. Moreover, I also don't want to be buried together with you. At least after reincarnation, we can still have peace. Li Shishir said angrily, "Shut up. You finally admitted that you are a jinx. I said that the two of us should go together. Not everyone should go through the wormhole. Of course, it is safest to send the message separately. You have a reverse space floating raft. Although it is a little broken, it can still be used. Moreover, you also have experience in this area, but I have never tried it. So, you go back through the negative space, and I'll go through the wormhole. This way, we can ensure that the information won't be buried here." Ice Guest's sword pouted. She wanted to refute, but could not find a reason. The two of them were actually fighting over who would take the risk to go through the stagnant wormhole. At this moment, everyone wanted to take the most dangerous path by themselves. It was just that the way they communicated was different from normal people. "If it's really a dangerous moment, I'll be intercepted when I go out," Youngly shouted. "That's great. Now that both of us are dead, the Soul Hall will react." Naturally, Pyrolite Mountain will know that something has happened in the land of exile. Iceman's sword clapped. "This is a good idea. Why don't we just kill ourselves here? If one is dead and the other is half dead, how will the family judge?" Youngly really couldn't stand this person's heartlessness. "You stay here and guard for a while. I'll leave after I go in case someone tries to mess with me after I go in. Without you, I still have a chance to survive." Ice Guest Sword was still not done. "Well, the islands you have in the Thousand Islands region are not bad. Who did you leave your will to? Why don't you write me a will now?" Youngly rushed into the wormhole, leaving behind a broken voice. "I'll leave it to anyone but you. I see that your glabella is turning black. You're going to die prematurely." The few swordsmen who were guarding the place were stunned. From the actions of the two senior monarchs, they realized something, but they didn't know if they should ask. They could only stand aside and stare blankly. Ice Guest Sword was a little soft-hearted. He didn't know if there were any enemy spies among these people, but there were definitely some. It couldn't be all of them. Xianyuan Sword Sect's iron order was given. Everyone had to guard their position, even if they didn't know what was going to happen next. It was a little sad. Thus, he asked, "What's your mission?" One of the Yuanying was very determined, even though he was already very old. "Guard the wormhole." Ice Guest Sword sighed, "No. If there's really a strong enemy coming, you won't be able to defend. It's the same with me. Swordsmen are not afraid of sacrifice, but the sacrifice must be worth it. Your mission is to close the wormhole as soon as you discover the enemy's tracks. There will be people on the other side to cooperate with you. Then try to survive. Old Shio smiled faintly. Senior uncle, do you think that when we discover the danger here, we will still have the chance to escape? This is a mission that will lead to death. We are betting that the enemy won't come from here. If we are wrong, the price will be our lives. That's all. Everyone has their own expectations. There's no need for senior uncle to remind us. I guess sword side. It was very cruel, but it was the truth. Not only them, but also the spies in Zhuozhou. When they discover the enemy's tracks and spread the news, it would be the moment of their death. The moment passed quickly. Ice guessed Sword no longer hesitated. He got out of the wormhole and leaped into the sky. What Young Li said was very true. Between the two of them, in terms of swordsmanship, Young Li was stronger than him. However, he had the advantage of having many teachers. He learned a lot of things and had a lot of hobbies. He dabbled in the field of anti-space. This was something that Young Li could not compare to. The two of them had known each other for thousands of years. They understood each other very well. Under such circumstances, he had no reason to force his way through the wormhole. The only thing that worried him was that if their guess was completely false and Young Li was trapped in the wormhole, how would he have the face to stay in Mount Shao in the future? His fellow disciples would treat this as a joke. The two true monarchs had lost their lives in order to deliver fake news. The reason why they could be so sure was because of their perception of each other's situation. When danger came, the source of the disaster and the magnifier had a telepathic connection. When the two of them felt danger at the same time, this danger was bound to come. There was no way to avoid it. His imagination ran wild. As soon as he leaped out of the atmosphere, he felt like he had fallen into an ice cave. This was because he had already realized that there was a divine sense sweeping over him. This was not the method of the exiles, nor was it the method of an ordinary true monarch. This was a Yang spirit monitoring the exiled land. And here, he and Young Li were the most powerful cultivators. Then it was self-evident where this level of divine sense came from. Sure enough, the arrangement of the cultivators outside the exiled land was useless. This originated from Hung He's arrangement thousands of years ago. It was also because of the suppression of strength that was on a completely different level. Xin Yuan did not consider the exiled land as the most likely main battlefield. This had nothing to do with judgment, because you could only choose the most likely one, not the least likely one. The biggest reason why the higher-ups of Xin Yuan did not think that the exiled land was Hung He's attack was that the wormhole space could not support a large number of cultivators to pass through. Only a few could pass through at a time. For a war, this kind of tactic was extremely undesirable. But the people of Hung He had chosen this method. Chapter 1818. P.S. Asking for a guaranteed monthly ticket. The Iceman's sword knew that he was in extreme danger. The fact that Hengyang God could sense him meant that someone would arrive soon. Fighting was perhaps the most courageous and hot-blooded thing. If Xin Yuan was safe in the end, he would be enshrined in the Hall of Valiance and be revered by the younger generation like those familiar seniors. But he would not do that, because doing so would be meaningless. This was something he learned from his interactions with Master Lu. He would rather be a useful deserter than a so-called martyr who only cared about his own moral integrity. In fact, he still had a chance to escape, and that was to enter his own personal space. This was a skill that he had learned. He had worked hard to master it in order to save his own life. He only needed 5 breaths to complete this space. There was a high probability that he would arrive before the opponent's Yang God. But he sadly discovered that he did not want to use the skill that he had worked hard to master when it came to saving his own life. At this moment, he deeply understood why the senior sword vein had always taught them that attack was defense, and that they should not put too much effort into those life-saving moves. If you were a real Xianyuan swordsman, when danger came, your sword heart would not allow you to use those things. This was only a momentary choice. When the divine sense reached him, he immediately took out the anti-space floating raft and poured his magical power into it. This operation would take more than 10 breaths. It was very likely that he would not be able to complete it, but he would rather be regarded as a cowardly deserter after death and be spurned by others to fight for a chance to send out a warning in the main world. Because Li Sheng might not be able to pass through the wormhole. That guy always thought that it was the Iceman's sword who was dragging him down. In fact, his luck was as good as shit, not much better than Li Sheng's. This anti-space floating raft was not a broken raft. It was a commodity that he had used all kinds of methods to get from the 3 pure ones for hundreds of years. For his realm, it was already very good to be able to enter the main and reverse space channel in 10 breaths. For this reason, he did not care about his magical power output. It was hard to say whether his luck was good or bad. The powerful existence that had discovered him had rushed here immediately. He was moving at high speed, but he did not use his full strength. This was because a true monarchine master would not be able to escape his pursuit. Even if he wanted to escape to the main world, he would need at least 10 breaths of time. There was still time. With this mentality, when the sun god entered the attack range, what he saw was a positive and negative space channel taking shape. One of the floating rafts had already entered, leaving only half of its tail behind. It was obvious that this master was in too much of a hurry to escape. There were obvious flaws in the spatial passageway. If he was unlucky, he wouldn't even need to do anything. He would be buried in the spatial passageway. This was the consequence of chasing after time. However, he would not place his hopes on the other party's misfortune. Of course, he had to bury this person with his own hands. Yang spirit cultivators had countless tricks up their sleeves. They wouldn't use brute force to throw out a punch or a kick. That would be too embarrassing. He had a better trick up his sleeve: spatial deviation. With a tap of his hand, the spatial passageway that had yet to completely disappear began to undergo an inexplicable change. There were 2 effects: spatial compression and reverse reversal. After the spatial passageway was reversed, the other party would definitely be in the spatial passageway for a long period of time. How could a master's body withstand such spatial compression? What went in was a person. What came out was a mass of flesh and blood. It could also be a mass of dust. A very advanced spatial technique. It was just right to use it now. Not only could it kill the other party, it would also continue for a long period of time. Otherwise, would the death of such a master alert Xianyuan to changes in the land of exile? The moment swordsman Iceman entered the spatial passageway, he knew that he was in trouble. His magical power output was too fast, exceeding the normal time limit of transmigration. This caused a series of chain reactions. The final result was that he would definitely not be able to return to the main world. He was destined to spend the rest of his life in this spatial passageway. Of course, this so-called lifetime would not last long. After his magical power was exhausted, he would be crushed into pieces by the spatial passageway. Or was it because he did not accumulate enough experience, did not practice enough, and wasted too much time on the beach? Actually, there was a big reason for this. However, in view of his consistent history, things always developed in the worst direction. He regretted it a little. If he died so sullenly, he might as well turn around and fight with all his strength. It was like a landlord burrowing into the ground when he was in danger. In the end, it turned out to be a dead end. He burrowed himself to death. I wonder how Youngli is doing. I hope to meet him in the underworld. It was not that he cursed his friend, but if both of them died, his family would realize something faster. Then he felt that the spatial passageway began to uncontrollably deflect. At the same time, a mountain-like pressure came from all directions. There was good news and bad news. The bad news was that Hung Heyang God overestimated his strength as a Xianyuan master swordsman. His body's magical power was different from that of a normal Xianyuan swordsman. Therefore, while others could temporarily withstand the pressure, he could not. His body had shrunk by size in a very short period of time. The barbecued meat in the land of exile tasted good, so he had eaten a lot in the last meal. Now, the meat was squeezing out of his anus like sausages. The good news was that he found that the spatial passageway that he could never reach the main world had been forcefully pushed back. He had to admit that Hung Heong God's strength was really extraordinary. Even though he was so far away, he could still control his direction in space. It was just that his eyes were a little blind. Idiot, Ice Guest Sword felt that his meridians had been crushed into a ball. Even his manhood had been crushed. Just as he was about to explode from the pressure, his body suddenly became light. He had been sent to another space, a familiar space. In fact, this kind of pressure sounded very brutal, but the effect on him could still be repaired. The problem came at the moment when he came out. It was like a person diving in the deep sea, suddenly coming out of the water. It would cause a real disaster because of the huge change in pressure. For a cultivator, if he could control his own magical power, all of this was of course not a problem. But the problem was that he could not control it now. But he did not care. He opened his clenched right hand, and a sword talisman swept through the air. This was the best communication tool that Xian Yuan had prepared for the spies. It did not need to be injected with magical power, and it could automatically record the location and scene. He touched his lower body with his left hand and suddenly felt that life was meaningless. He was floating in the void just like that. He did not know where he had appeared in the main world. Was he still in Zhuozhou? But he had tried his best. The only thing he was worried about now was Young Li. He really wanted to know who was more unlucky between the two of them. Everyone was passing through the positive and negative space, and the difficulty was the same. There should be a difference between them. Chapter 1819. Wu Yin and Xuanyuan's main forces were concentrated in outer space. For a commander of an army, taking an unconventional approach was a very bad habit. Sudden changes were only a last resort when they were forced to a certain point by the environment and situation. As long as they still had energy, the army would not gamble so easily. This was the difference between an individual and a group. It was the same for Wu Yan. Placing the army in outer space was the best choice. They could not gamble on the blind tunnels, wormholes, or other places where the enemy might appear. The best way for the swordsman army was to discover the enemy and attack with all their might. She had already paid more attention to the land of exile after being reminded by Shaoshan and Urshian. After they left, after discussing with a few young gods, she even sent Shang Ting to guard the entrance of the wormhole at Mount Zhonglao, just in case. Looking at the main forces during the war, looking at the scouts before the war, this was the essence of war tactics. What she needed to do was to make a comprehensive judgment based on the information that was constantly sent back. Whether a commander was qualified or not depended on whether she and the higher-ups of Xianyuan Kingdom were able to judge the situation accurately. Was it fast? Was it possible to find the most fundamental core in the midst of all this confusion? News kept coming in from all directions. This was not the people of Zhuozhou being paranoid. It was the people of Hung He who were purposely creating misunderstandings. Their goal was to make them run for their lives. The people of Hung He were very clear. Just like how the Alliance's attack on Hung He realm could not be completely sudden, Hung He's attack on Green Sky could not be done without anyone noticing. Before the 13th Great Tao shattered, all the realms involved would put in a lot of effort in their own planet's defense. The five rings were like this, and so was Green Sky. This also included Luo Sutian, Zhou Xian, Anchor Chain Realm, and other realms. This was the understanding that a realm must have. No one would open up their airspace at a time like this to celebrate. But the swordsman army of Xianyuan did not move at all. They relied on the overall cohesion of the Zhuozhou star system, especially the Supreme Ding Xian Garrison Army and Garan's Chuanshu Garrison Army. They could almost handle any small disturbance that appeared, whether it was from the blind tunnels, or from other directions, or directly from the reverse space, as the decisive force. The swordsman army remained as still as a mountain. The 3,000 swordsmen were ready for battle. At the very least, such frequent harassment proved one thing. The attacks of the Hung River realm would arrive at any moment. Outside the blue sky, 3,000 swordsmen sat cross-legged in the air. It was a magnificent sight. Not a single sword hum could be heard. Not a single noise could be heard. After being suppressed for hundreds of years, they needed a satisfying battle to prove the existence of the sword vein. The sacrificial blood yellow springs can be wielded. The sword in the scabbard is even more dangerous. Under such circumstances, it was no longer possible for the masses to voice their opinions. Only a few top decision-makers could make the final decision, including several young spirit immortals and Bu Lian's reincarnation. Several months away from victory, an indescribable fluctuation of spiritual vigor has appeared. It's moving unsteadily. The blue sea startide in the direction of the blue sea realm has changed. The reason is unknown. Rumor has it that a positive and negative space barrier has been established in the distant sky of the lower world. There was news every day. Some of them were shocked because of nervousness, and there were also all kinds of man-made smokescreens. Because of the existence of time nodes, the closer it was to this time node, the more news spread. Sometimes, Guanshan and the others couldn't control themselves. They sent some swordsmen to check it out because they were worried that the enemy would use a strategy of splitting up and attacking together. If the enemy came from multiple directions, would it be appropriate to gather the main force and not move? But Bullian, who had been through a lot of battles in the universe, was unmoved. She knew very well that since they dared to come to the blue sky, it was impossible for them to fight against the swordsmen without combining their forces. Splitting up and attacking together? Don't they know that the sword vein is best at controlling the sword? Dividing it into several parts to be eaten by the swordsmen? They must have a final goal, but they didn't have enough information to find it. At this time, the general's calmness would spread to every swordsman. No one knew what Senior Sister Bullian was thinking. She must be very confident, right? At least she looked very powerful. She was just putting on an act. Bullian complained in her heart. She had a lot of experience, but most of it was from hot-blooded charges. She just had to kill. In her era, she didn't need to control the overall situation. She never had the qualifications. These things were all learned by her from others. In that era, heroes came out in large numbers. Crow Ancestor, Wu Shixing, Chong Lu, Chong Xian, Han Feng, Yan Er, and so on. Which one of them wasn't an outstanding person? Why would she need to take the lead? And her personality wasn't suitable for this. But now, she had no choice but to act as if she had a card up her sleeve. Because she knew that everyone was watching. If only little Lu was here. That guy was born for such a big scene. But there were several battlefields, and the most important one was Hung River. She was waiting. There must be the most valuable information. She just had to grab it. In the past, she had countless friends that she could rely on. But now, were these friends still reliable? Each one of them was unreliable, cunning, and sloppy. On this day, a sword light came from the blue sky. It was very fast. It didn't care about the sword formation outside and rushed directly to Bullian and the other young gods. It was a perfected cultivator who guarded the wormhole on Zhonglao Peak with Shang Ting. He was holding someone in his arms. There's danger. Among the two perfected cultivators in charge of the exile, Senior Brother Li fell out of the wormhole and was seriously injured and unconscious. Senior Brother Shang Ting sent me to deliver an urgent report and asked for more manpower to monitor the direction of the exile. Bullian's eyebrows twitched. She and the other young gods checked young Li's injuries, but he was completely unrecognizable. Not a single magic item was left on him. The perfected cultivator hurriedly said, Senior Brother Shang Ting means that Senior Brother Li's injuries weren't caused by anyone, but by the spatial tear in the wormhole. He still holds the sword talisman in his right palm. It must be used to send messages out of the wormhole. But under the spatial tear in the wormhole, the sword talisman has completely lost its effect. We don't know what he means. We thought that there must be something urgent that forced Senior Brother Lee to risk his life to enter the wormhole. The wormhole is still blocked and can't be passed through normally. From experience, it will take another 20 days. Senior sisters and senior brothers, please make a decision. Guan Shan checked carefully. Shang Ting is right. It wasn't caused by someone, it was purely a spatial tear. Then, what was it that forced him to not slow down for even a moment and make such a decision? The wormhole is blocked, and the risk is uncontrollable. The success rate is less than 30%. It's not feasible for us to enter from Zhonglao Peak. Not to mention the small number of people passing through at once. More than half of them will die, and the rest will be injured. It's meaningless. It will take several days to reach the exile from the nearest anti-space node. Chapter 1820. At this moment, a sword talisman came from the depths of the void. It was the sword talisman that Bullion had personally handed to the sword-shaking duo. She was very familiar with it. She pointed at the sword talisman, and the information on it was vivid in her eyes. At the same time, a paper figure appeared in the background of the void. Yes, it was vaguely in the shape of a human. The two people who had been sent to the land of exile had both rushed back in such a tragic way to report it. The onlookers felt a surge of anger rising in their hearts, as if they wanted to devour someone. The sword talisman showed that there were still no specific traces of the enemy. It was purely a guess. How many enemies were there? What were their composition? Where were they now? How did they plan to enter Qin Kong? There was nothing, it was just a guess. Because when Youngli walked into the wormhole, he wasn't sure. When the ice guest's sword crossed the space passage, he knew the enemy's whereabouts, but he didn't have the chance to imprint it in the sword talisman. The sun gods were still hesitating. In fact, this was no different from the news they had received from other sources during this period of time. It was just that it wasn't the Xianyuan swordsman who was injured, but the Su Run, the Lanhai people. There was still no concrete news. This made them not dare to act rashly. Bullion let out a long breath. She was so lucky that her friends from her previous life didn't let her down. Her friends in this life were still the same. In her most difficult time, he had used his own way to support her. She looked at Huang Xiaoya. Xiaoya, you go. Find him. Then bring them back to Shao Mountain. Huang Xiaoya nodded with tears in her eyes and immediately set off. She had once trembled 3 times on Shao Mountain, but now she didn't know if 2 of them were dead or alive. It made her heart feel like it was being cut by a knife. Bullion didn't discuss with the others and directly gave the order. Listen to my orders. Charge back to Shao Mountain and surround it. Also, tell Shangting to withdraw and leave only the normal defense force at Old Man Peak. This is a death trap, voluntary principle. Also, tell the sects of Qin Kong to surround the north. Tell Ding to wait for the left Zhou Dao to surround Qin Kong. I want this place to be the tomb of the Hengi people. Not a single bug can escape. With the commander's command, no one hesitated any longer. The 3,000 swordsmen turned around and charged towards the blue sky. The moment they had been waiting for had finally arrived. On the way, Bullion explained to her senior brothers of Yang spirit, there have been spies of faith in the land of exile for thousands of years. When Xiaoyi was in Jindan, he went to Zhouxian because of this. At that time, he didn't know who was behind this. The people of Hengi County are very good at spatial techniques. Little E once fought them to the death in an extra-dimensional space and knows that such spatial techniques are very common in the Hengi County. It's hard to say what kind of spatial abilities can be derived from this. The Yang gods seem to have realized something. In fact, these things were not a secret. What Bullion had told them was also kept in the sect. Bullion's eyes turned cold. Therefore, our assumption that only a few people can pass through the wormhole at a time is probably wrong. That may be the case for us, but it may not be the case for the people of Hengi River who are proficient in dimensional space techniques. Perhaps the existence of the wormhole is just a guide. They have other ways to directly penetrate the barrier from the land of exile and enter Shao Mountain in large numbers. They can also cause damage to the sect immediately. Then, from the inside out, they can easily break through the barrier of heaven and earth. At that time, whether they fight, stay, or run will depend on the situation. With the destruction of the county, their goal this time is basically achieved. From then on, our Xianyuan sword sect will be a joke in the cultivation world of the universe. We wanted to attack others, but they destroyed our home first. Guanshan nodded, agreeing with her judgment. Senior sister, you mean that they don't want to occupy Qing Kong? They just want to attack us in terms of prestige? The main battlefield is still in Hengyi County? Bu Yin sneered. Exactly. If our Xianyuan County hadn't returned to help, they would have been destroyed even more thoroughly. Now that they've returned, they'll kill and decide their next move based on their strength. As for why they think that they can withstand the anger of a fifth ring in the Hengyi County, that's for little Lu to consider. We don't need to worry about them. Gong Yao asked, Senior sister, we understand what you mean. Let the opponent enter Shao Mountain and kill them. But there are a few problems here. First of all, how can you ensure that all the opponents enter and not leave a portion of their strength in the land of exile? If that's the case, we won't be able to chase after those who enter the land of exile in time. Secondly, since they have a special space technique to enter in large numbers, it means that they can also use this method to leave. Lastly, if we place the battlefield on Shao Mountain, will it have a disastrous effect on Shao Mountain? Those are the things of our ancestors that have been left behind for tens of thousands of years. We just let the enemy destroy them, and we don't even dare to casually do anything. Seeing that everyone was looking at her, she guessed that this was their common question. Everyone accepted her order without hesitation, but she also needed a reasonable explanation. Bu Yin's long, shapely eyebrows rose. It's precisely because they think that they can freely enter and exit through space that they're moving together. Keep people? What's the point of keeping people? Take root in a place like the land of exile? There's no guarantee of war, so we can only bet that their entire army will gather and advance and retreat together. Only in this way can they form enough attack power to compete with the sword vein. She pointed at Gong Yao. You're all young gods, but you're absent-minded about the sect's secrets that young gods must know. You only care about your own cultivation. What a scandal. It's recorded in the sect's supreme secret scriptures that the true control pivot of the wormhole is not on Shao Mountain. That's just a facade. The pivot is on the land of exile, because the energy source that supports the wormhole is on the land of exile. The significance of the existence of the heaven-defying sect in the land of exile is to provide the last layer of protection for Shao Mountain at critical moments. The only instruction that the previous sect masters received from Shao Mountain was that when the enemy attacked Shao Mountain, they were to completely destroy the wormhole. Why do the people of Hengyi River have to pass through the land of exile? They have the ability to travel through space, so where can't they go? This means that the wormhole has a special meaning to them. I don't know the specifics, but once the wormhole completely disappears, their so-called space return journey may not work. When the battle starts, the entire space around Shao Mountain will be blocked. We've been preparing for this for a long time, and there's also the support provided by the three pure ones. We must not leave a single one of them here. Finally, Bu Yin pointed at Shao Mountain, which was close at hand. What is this? This is a broken snow mountain. You've traveled all over the universe and seen countless majestic mountains. What is Shao Mountain compared to them? It's famous because of the Xianyuan sword sect, not because of those old buildings. How many times has Shao Mountain been attacked in history? The flying peak is gone. So what? What about the once rampant raiders? They've long become history, but our Xianyuan still exists. As long as Xianyuan exists, Shao Mountain exists. Big Stickley complained in private when he was still around, saying that these were all urban villages. He wanted to start the reconstruction of the old city, but he never had the chance. Now it's just the right time to smash them all and build a new Xianyuan. Build some iconic buildings and image projects. Use the best design, hire the best construction team, Don't ask for the best, just ask for the most expensive. These are not my words, but Big Stick Lee's original words. Chapter 1821. In the land of exile, the army swarmed in. Ishurcho looked at the team behind him with satisfaction. Everything was under control. This was a perfect surprise attack. 10 Hengi Yangshun grand ceremonies. More than 10 Universe Yang gods who were on good terms with the Hung River realm, more than 20 Earth Yang gods, and a super large hive. This was the main force of the attack on Qin Kong. It was already very strong. After all, the pressure from the Hung River realm was very heavy. It was impossible to transfer too much power to participate in this attack. But for Qin Kong, nearly 50 Yang gods were enough. They had the ability to plow through the palace. The latest news he received was that Qin Kong was already prepared. The Xianyuan sword sect had returned, but the 3 pure ones in Tai were still in the 5th ring. This was acceptable. He never thought that Qin Kong would be completely unprepared. The question was how much power did they put into their preparations? Apart from the Insect Clan, the rest of the long-range attack this time was made up of elite Yang spirit forces. This was also a helpless move. Mobilizing ordinary Supremes or Yuaning realm cultivators would cause too much of a commotion, and they could not cover their tracks at all. And there wasn't enough time. Zerg was an exception. When it came to hating humans and wreaking havoc in the mortal world, no race was more experienced than Zerg. If they really broke into Qin Kong, the insects would scatter. How could it be so easy to clear them out? This kind of power, on paper, was already much stronger than the Xianyuan sword sect. But he knew that it couldn't be calculated like this. As the fiercest sword sect in the universe, the real Xianyuan primordial spirit also had the power to fight against other orthodoxies. The only difference was that it couldn't be reborn. Even Yin God swordsmen had a certain fighting ability. There were at least 100 people here. If they really fought, with the swordsman risking his life, he knew that he couldn't use force. Just as the distance between the 5th ring and the Hung River realm was very far, it was also very difficult for them to come to the 5th ring. They gathered people in a hurry and had to use their most secret ally, the Earth Shaman. Witchcraft was the most popular supernatural and mysterious power before humans entered the cultivation civilization. It was divided into 2 parts, God bestowment and incantation. The branch of God bestowment was passed down and intertwined with the Hengi sector at some point in time. That was how the Hengi sector's unique godhood orthodoxy came into being. The Hengi River orthodoxy became more and more profound in the divine bestow branch. Relying on the special geographical environment and cultural traditions of the Hengi River, it surpassed the master in this path. In comparison, witchcraft gradually declined under the tide of the development of the cultivation world, gradually withdrawing from the stage of history. However, in terms of inheritance, the 2 orthodoxies indeed had many similarities. In fact, it was not just these 2 orthodoxies. Even Taoism and Buddhism were the same. Didn't they develop in the early stages of their formation through these mysterious tribal sacrificial activities? It was just that Taoism and Buddhism got rid of the false and retained the true in traditional witchcraft. They gradually abandoned those things that pretended to be mysterious and were more inclined towards the understanding of the nature of the universe. On the other hand, traditional witchcraft insisted on remaining ancient and unchanged, rejecting innovation and new things. The end result was that the cultivation world's younger generation overtook the older generation, and the older generation died on the beach. If this process continued, if they only pursued the extreme of nature, then the final direction of this world development would be like one of Lu Xiaoyi's previous lives. It would completely embark on the road of technology and the direction of the participation of all citizens. The Hengi sector could form a relationship with the Earth Shaman because there was a very deep cause and effect behind it. However, it was not a powerful force that could be gathered just because of a crisis. These 20 or so Earth shamans were also the reason why the Hengi sector dared to take the initiative to provoke Qing Kong. In terms of surprise attack, they did it. The Five-Ring Alliance did not expect them to have such an ally. It was very difficult to gather these forces. The most difficult thing was the insect nest. Even if Zerg hated the swordsmen to the bone, they were no longer willing to work for these humans after suffering a loss and being tricked once. Even if the Zerg had a strong vitality and amazing reproductive ability, these sun god level Zergs and Zerg mothers were not inexhaustible in the universe. It took a long time to cultivate them. The Hengi sector paid a huge price, and it was not worth mentioning to outsiders. Emperor Yi's sacrificial puppet floated over. Emperor Yi was the name, and the puppet was the ox's tail on the flag. It was used for decoration, and it was the symbol of the leader. This was the name of the ancient people, and it was no longer used. When combined together, it meant the leader of the Earth Shaman, Emperor Yi. Uncultured people generally tended to think the wrong way. We have to speed up. It has been a while since that cultivator escaped back to the main world. No matter how slow the swordsman is, they will feel something after a long time. Ishurcho nodded. It will start soon. The main thing is that those dirty insects are not easy to control, and it is too troublesome to pull them through the dimensional space. We can't leave first. Now that the dimensional space has been established, with the wormhole as a guide, it will not be a problem to find Mount E. What do you plan to do with this place? Emperor E was very interested in seeing the chaotic and panicked cultivators of the heaven-defying sect. Ishurcho snorted. Ants with flawed orthodoxy and superficial spiritual vigor are not worth mentioning. I am afraid that killing them will dirty my hands. Moreover, there are some righteous people who bought time for us to enter the blue sky. For them, it is not good to kill here. Emperor E nodded. Fine. Originally, we could use some special methods to sacrifice them to the heavens, but it seems that it is too late now. There will be a chance sooner or later. Ishurcho was in high spirits. Of the 3 battlefields, 2 are restraining, and Hengi is the main one. But in my opinion, the real restraining battlefield is the Five-Ring Alliance. The blue sky is also the main battlefield, and we will break the backbone of Xuanyuan's Sorvane here. If there is still time, we can also destroy the 3 pure ones. The first sound will start in the blue sky, then the Five-Ring Alliance, and finally Hengi. By the time Hengi hears the news, we will have finished fighting here, right? Emperor Yi was also very clear about the order of the battle and was generally satisfied. Otherwise, if it was too dangerous, they would not have come to interfere. Attacking the confidence and morale of the Five-Ring Alliance is the best strategy. But given the distance between the 2 places, how can you guarantee that the news here will be transmitted to Hengi boundary in time? Ishurcho smiled proudly. We have already prepared for this. Didn't the Five-Ring Alliance invite a genius of the Heaven of Interior? Hee. Through these people's mouths, they will have to believe it even if they don't, right? Emperor E clapped and laughed. He had to admit that the strategy of this distant relative of his orthodoxy was indeed ingenious. Using the Heaven of Exterior to deal with the Heaven of Interior, he played with the power of the Heaven of Interior. As long as the result of the battle here was out, the morale of Hengi boundary would definitely be low. What was the point of the Alliance's existence if the leader's nest was destroyed? Next, which domain's lair would be destroyed? Under the influence of fear, returning to defend this domain would gradually become the mainstream voice. They might not be able to retreat immediately, but it was inevitable that they would have no fighting spirit. A vigorous encirclement and suppression ended without a result. It was the model of the pinnacle of tactics. Chapter 1822. The Hung River sect cultivators were still making their final preparations. Their speed was already very fast, starting from the moment they killed the Xinyuan Yin spirit-perfected lord who escaped. They immediately rushed down to the land of exile. The cultivators of the land of exile had almost no time to react. They couldn't react at all. Most of their forces were sent out to investigate blindly. Who would have thought that the enemy had already snuck in? This was because of the great difference in strength, and also because of the sabotage by the traitor. None of the 4 Xianyuan Yuanying Jin Dan who guarded the wormhole retreated. All of them died in battle, using their lives to illustrate the integrity of the swordsman. Even if they were a mediocre swordsman from the land of exile, they were worthy of their flying swords. However, even though they died valiantly, they did not complete the mission given to them by the sect. The wormhole was still intact because before the enemy appeared, several heaven-defying cultivators took the initiative to help them defend the wormhole. It was these people who made their final struggle meaningless. The famous Xianyuan swordsman in the universe was only SOSO. Not everyone understood the huge difference between being born in MTE and coming to the land of exile. With a light blow, the oars were turned into ashes. The 4 Xianyuan swordsmen did not even have time to slash their flying swords in front of their opponents. Then, they set up the 2-dimensional space to warp. The wormhole was normal, which meant that their grassland friends on the other side were also doing well. This was a good sign. In just a moment, the people of Hung River Sect built a dimensional passage with superhuman efficiency. A large part of this was borrowing the energy of the wormhole. They did not need to waste so much time and effort. If there were only a few dozen human yang spirits, the time it would take to pass through would only be counted in breaths. But if there was a huge insect nest, size and mass were the biggest limiting factors of space warping, and they really could not leave these insects. Because in the future battle, under the human wave tactic of Qin Kong, only the insect tide could slightly resist. They were also the cannon fodder they relied on. No matter what, they had to get the insects over. In just a moment, the Xianyuan swordsman group in outer space could not react so quickly. They had to get the news, confirm, judge, quarrel, and finally come to an agreement. With this amount of time, the sky could be plowed through. Emperor Yi looked at the huge insect hive that had descended. One could imagine how shocking it was for such a space wonder to appear in the human world. Not to mention the mortals. Even the cultivators could not help but tremble when they saw the base camp of these ferocious creatures, where countless strange insect heads poked out of the hive and let out all kinds of howls and shrieks. Once this thing spread, the insect swarms would attack. It would be as large as the land of exile. After a few days, would there still be anyone alive? He kept quiet out of fear. Since the appearance of the insect nest, there had been no resistance at all. No one dared to take on such a threat. Is it really a good idea to summon these things? Ishurcho sighed. The higher-ups of Hung River had an intense dispute over this. The conservative faction, led by Amir Khan, was determined not to allow Zur to join them. On the other hand, the radical faction led by Salman Khan believed that the existence of a domain was at stake, and they should no longer abide by those ancient frameworks. As you know, Hung River is a domain that is easily stirred up and fooled. If someone with ulterior motives instigated it, the emotions of the people would immediately soar. Actually, what do those small commoners know? They are just the tools of others. They live a hard life. So what do they know about the general trend of the universe? Then this is the result. Emperor Yi sighed. They were passed down by ancient witches and did not place too much importance on these things. As long as they could be used, they would use them. They were still the same as the ancient tribes. They did not have the concept of countries, domains, or even people. Ishurcho continued. Originally, this attack should have been led by the most intelligent and powerful person, Amir Khan. He was also a candidate who was selected early on, and his reputation in Hung River was unparalleled. However, because he was unwilling to wallow in the mire with Zerg, he ultimately stayed in Hung River to be responsible for organizing the defense, and I replaced him. The responsibility was heavy, so he did not dare to be careless. Fortunately, with everyone's cooperation over the years, it was barely satisfactory. This time, we are only one step away from success. You and I will work together sincerely, advance and retreat together, and strive to return the same way we came. Only then will we be able to live up to the selfless support of Hung River. We were born from the same root, so it is our duty to help each other. Emperor, he was very polite. However, only the ancient witches like them knew what he was thinking in his heart. How would the universe change? How would it change? How would it change? No one could say for sure. However, to the Earth Witches, this was their only chance to seek to change themselves. Where could they find an opportunity that only came once every few million years? If they waited for another few million years, the witches might not even exist anymore. How could they miss this opportunity? They had to show their presence and join in to catch the tide. However, it was extremely difficult for the ancient witches to rise again. If they really stood out alone, all the orthodoxies in the universe would surround them and annihilate them. Therefore, they could not use the name of the ancient witches. They had to rely on other events. The Hung River incident was a very good entry point. Not only could they participate in the battle of the universe's powers, but they could also help the few orthodoxies in the main world that had good intentions towards the ancient witches. Why not? Hung River Realm was very important to the ancient witches. It was the bridgehead they used to announce their return to the main world. They could not leave such a powerful potential ally in the lurch. If they saved Hung River Realm this time, the next time the ancient witches were in trouble, they would be qualified to receive help from Hung River Realm. This was originally an exchange of mutual help. Therefore, when Hung River Realm made the request, they immediately agreed and sent out more than 20 ancient witches to participate. Originally, they could mobilize more forces to participate. However, they cannot be too high-profile when they first came out of seclusion after millions of years. It would attract the suspicion of various forces, and they would also be suspected of stealing the limelight. Therefore, they only sent so many witches, which was enough for a mere medium-sized realm. This time, they participated in a very low-key manner and did not pull out the banner of the ancient witches. They wanted to see what the cultivation world had become after they left the main world for millions of years. How would they view the ancient witches from all aspects? Which circle would they be divided into? Or would they be treated as a different species? Would they be friendly or hostile? In addition, what was the level of the ancient witches' strength in the current cultivation world? The Xianyuan swordsman was their touchstone. If they could easily pass this hurdle, it meant that they still had a lot of hope in the main world. If they could not withstand a single blow from the swordsman, then they might have to try again with the Dharma cultivators and monks. No matter what, they wanted to discover something through this battle that would provide crucial guidance for the future of the ancient witches. Therefore, they did not fight for power or benefits. Instead, they prepared for this battle even more seriously, the hope of an ancient race. Chapter 1823. The people of Hung, he moved very quickly. From the moment they landed on the Qi layer to the moment they left, they had no time to deal with the trash orthodoxies in exile. They didn't even kill 10 people in total, including 4 Xianyuan swordsmen who would rather die than retreat. The others were completely confused. They didn't expect this to be an attack from a powerful enemy and thought it was an internal problem in the exile. The sun gods had the temperament of a sun god and disdained to kill these small fries. There was no sense of accomplishment. The insects didn't think so, but they weren't released at all. The cultivators of the heaven-defying sect found it a good idea to lie down. If they fled in the sky now, they would be easily injured. They pretended to be dead and didn't come out. Anyway, these people's target was Qing Kong, and they seemed to be in a hurry. In this cultivation world, there were more smart people. As soon as the dimensional space was established, the entire Hung He army entered. This was also a gamble. The safest way was to send a portion of the vanguard in to scout the situation and then let the rest follow. This was the essence of the art of war. But it wasn't very practical in the cultivation world. Separated by the dimensional space, the people who went in couldn't shout to the rest. It's safe here. They couldn't circle back, right? Time was life, everything. Most importantly, the people of Hung, he believed that if they all went in, they would have the strength to fight Xian Yuan. Since that was the case, why dilly-dally and leave people at both ends? It was the right choice to not consider who the opponent was. So under the shocked gazes of the heaven-defying sect, the Hung He army came aggressively and left in a hurry. Not a single person or insect was left behind. Didn't they need to leave a few behind to control the retreat? Or did they just want to kill their way out of the main world? An old man walked out, trembling with fear. Even if he was one of the few supremes in the land of exile, a figure at the top of the pyramid, he had no intention of being a hero in front of so many young spirits and such a terrifying insect nest. Whoever acted was a fool. Seeing the old man walk forward carefully, a disciple behind him shouted in a low voice, "Master, Master, what are you doing? Why don't we wait? Who knows? Maybe those vicious people will come back." The old man chuckled. "It doesn't matter. He won't be back anytime soon. Let these things and Xian Yuan fight it out. He's finally gone. Let this old man set off some firecrackers to celebrate." The old man was the current leader of the heaven-defying sect, Taoist Jiangzhou. He was famous for being dim-sighted and cowardly. What he was best at was smoothing things over. It was unknown how he had managed to sit in such a high position in the heaven-defying sect. Set off firecrackers? Only he could think of something like that. However, since the sect leader had stepped forward and the enemy was no longer around, it wouldn't be good for him to continue hiding. In twos and threes, the cultivators of the heaven-defying sect came out one after another. They looked around the heaven-defying sect. Not bad. These people of Hung River were not as strange as the legend said. They didn't seem to have caused any losses to the sect. Taking out a firecracker from his ring, Jiang Zhong actually lit it up. Was he so scared that he wanted to use some noise to cheer himself up? The firecracker roared and shot up high, emitting a colorful light. Then it slowly fell and the light gradually dimmed. However, to everyone's surprise, the rumbling did not stop. Instead, it grew louder and louder, causing the entire sect to shake. Some of the higher-ranked cultivators of the heaven-defying sect asked in shock, "Senior brother, what did you do?" Jiang Zhong turned his head. His usual good-natured image was gone. Instead, his face was ferocious. "Listen up. Those who went out to help the people of Hung River, kill without mercy." 3,000 swordsmen stopped high above Shao Mountain. They formed a closed-loop sword formation at the boundary between the atmosphere and the void, perfectly hiding their auras. It was not easy to do this. That was not a single swordsman, but 3,000 tigers filled with killing intent. However, this position was right at the boundary of the blue sky. With the entire boundary concealing them, it was difficult to see anything if one did not observe closely. Under the watchful eyes of the swordsmen, a few true monarchs of the grassland led a dozen Yuanying into Shao Mountain. They quickly realized that their caution was meaningless, because the entire Shao Mountain was no longer defended. Not to mention cultivators, even the ordinary people had all retreated. It was very strange, but it was not without reason. Xian Yuan was an extreme orthodoxy. Every time they were faced with a matter of life and death, they would scatter low and mid-level Jindan Foundation establishment cultivators to the northern region. They would even scatter the blue sky, just in case. This was a tradition. Usually, those who stayed behind to guard Shao Mountain were those old people who were unwilling to leave Zhonglao Peak. They had to continue forward even if they were trembling with fear. When they got close to Zhonglao Peak, they realized that even those old fellows had disappeared. This was too strange. There was no one at all. This made them unconsciously feel strange. When they entered Zhonglao Peak's wormhole, what made them even more surprised was that there was no one guarding the wormhole. This was a trap. Even an idiot could guess. However, just because they knew, it did not mean that they could spread the news. Their minds were controlled by a strange, mysterious power, but they did not care that this would cause a disaster to the grassland. In the boundary of the world, a few young gods were deciding their fates. This time, they seemed to be very responsible. Gong Yao's eyes were sharp. In the year of Gengzi 339 of the Blue Sky calendar, Hung River Boundary invaded the northern region of Blue Sky from the land of exile. The people were in a terrible situation, and the cultivation world was shaken. There were grassland cultivators who rose up and resisted with their lives. In the end, they were outnumbered and their orthodoxy was exterminated. There should be no problem with me writing this, right? Everyone was silent. No one objected, which meant they agreed. The grassland orthodoxy was very annoying. They had never been disciplined by Xian Yuan. Xian Yuan considered leaving orthodoxy in the northern region to train his disciples, so he had never thought of killing them. However, in the current environment of the universe, it was clearly inappropriate to leave such a thing beside Shao Mountain. The meaning of training was far from enough to offset their potential threat, even if their threat was only small. Since there was such an opportunity, it was better to eliminate all future troubles. Taking advantage of Hung River Boundary's invasion, it would also prevent the other powers of Blue Sky from dilly-dallying and saying that Xian Yuan was bullying the weak. In just a few short sentences, even the history books were written. No one cared about them. They were a bunch of barbarians who did not know how to adapt to the situation. Even though they were high up in the sky, every swordsman could feel the strong spatial fluctuations coming from Zhonglao Peak. They knew that in the next moment, their enemies would appear in front of them. It was also at this juncture that the universe suddenly paused. Something in every cultivator's heart seemed to shatter. Nirvana collapsed. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.